in the AM with KM, and you never know who or what is going to join us in talking about the big issues that matter to you. Phone numbers here, 580-5436, 580-KIDO. Always appreciate everybody joining us, whether you're listening in Idaho or listening to the podcast or listening wherever. We appreciate you. Also appreciate the work of the Daily Caller, and when she's not on Newsmax or everywhere else, she joins us now, Mary Rook. Mary, thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
You know, I got to tell you, what's it like being on the Newsmax? I mean, I go, there's Mary, and there you are. How do you like that?
I always enjoy it. You know, Carl always makes it a fun show, and the topics we talk about really affect, you know, everybody's daily life, and especially if you have a family or if you're raising kids in this crazy society. So I always enjoy kind of touching on that kind of stuff.
Well, we appreciate that. We are going to talk about faith, family, and freedom in your new newsletter. But the Daily Caller has a new documentary out. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, sure. So the Daily Caller wanted to investigate the rising spike in squatters. So essentially what's been happening for the past several decades is that American property owners have been seeing, you know, their rights being stripped away and instead being given to people that have illegally broken into their homes, taken advantage of squatters' rights laws in various different states, and have, taken essentially ownership without paying for anything of the home, whether it was, you know, a renter that stopped paying their rent or someone that found an abandoned home or a home for sale on the market and just moved in themselves. They'd use these local laws in order to allow, them to take ownership. And so what the Daily Caller did, our investigative team traveled from city to city speaking with homeowners who have fallen victim to squatters, and sometimes opportunists who prey on landlords' kindness or, one of the women in here, her mother was 80 years old, and these two men from a local restaurant, they were busboys, moved in, and it was right before COVID. So then when COVID hit, you know, at first she thought, oh, this is such a great thing. I have these two men in here and they're taking care of my mother. And, you know, at the time she was too scared to go see her mom because she had young kids and she didn't want to be giving her mother COVID. And, you know, she was in her 80s and all of that fear mongering that went around. And so she thought, thank God I have these two men that are renting out this apartment next to my mother and, you know, they can help her. Well, they ended up, you know, defrauding her, taking money from her credit card, stopped paying rent. When the mother died, you know, it was impossible to get them out. She ended up having to hire a lawyer. She was trying to sell the home. I mean, she just ran into so many issues, and she's not alone. There are, you know, thousands of property owners across the United States who are using companies outside of the police force because most of the time when the police show up, they say this is actually a civil matter. We can't do anything about it, especially if the squatter is showing them some sort of fake or forged lease agreement. I mean, it was really eye-opening for me to watch how these people were able to, you know, connect with other squatters, and they were teaching each other how to bypass our laws and how to be able to, essentially just erase property owner rights in the United States.
And it's going on and going on. Is this a Biden thing, or is there something else responsible?
No, it's been going on long before Biden was in office. This is something, originally we had, I think I can't remember the exact name of it, but we've had a law on the books in almost all of almost every state in the United States where if there was an abandoned home, say like on the fringe of the city, you know, where it was starting to become dilapidated or it needed upkeep and the property owners weren't doing it, you could move into that, make upkeep, turn on the lights, you know, clean out the yard, make sure that the structure stayed sound and do all of these things. And after 10 or 15 years of staying in the residence, if the property owner never said anything, then you had a legal claim to say that you were the owner of the home. Now, on the other hand, these people are coming in to perfectly fine homes that have not been abandoned. They're either on the market for rental properties or they're on the market for, for being sold. And they move in. For example, there's a man that was featured on the news out in L.A. near Beverly Hills, and he moved into one of those massive mansions over there, and he was throwing massive parties, keeping all the residents up till 3 a.m., selling, tickets to the party essentially so that it could pay for the party and he could make money off of it. And there was nothing they could do. They sent the police force to the home. They said, this is a civil matter. You're going to have to go to the court system. But, of course, the court system takes forever, as with the woman who had the two men living with her mother, who is now deceased, found out the hard way. It takes years to get these people out of your home through the legal system. And, you're kind of stuck trying to prove that you are the owner and that these people are legally occupying the home. And in that time, they can stay there for free. You're required to do, upkeep. She was fined a huge fine because the men turned the water off and tried to claim that she turned the hot water off. I mean, it's just one disaster after another, and it's a really scary concept being a property owner myself, thinking, okay, well, if you get into this rental type business where you own a home and you have a renter in there, and what happens like in 2020 where the federal government just said you don't have to pay your rent and property owners can't have any legal recourse to force you to pay it. And so, it's a scary idea in our country that says in this day and age, there's no one's coming to save you. You're essentially on your own. And we also document a rise in companies that come and help these property owners out, either by, evictions, cleaning out the homes, boarding them up to make them impossible for people to break into while they're on the market. It was a kind of a wild thing to follow. And I would really, kind of give props to our investigative team and our documentary crew, because it's a beautiful documentary. It captures you for the entire time. It's about an hour and 15 minutes long. And it really gives you so much information, and also kind of tugs at you where, you get worried about the state of all of this, and then you kind of want to be empowered to make a difference and make a change.
More coming up with Mary Rook next from the Daily Caller. Kevin Mill in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio. Mary Rook joining us from the Daily Caller. Check her out on the Daily Caller, talking about family, faith, and freedom. I was talking about your Newsmax appearance, and it was amazing that you, Carl, and the Cowboy were talking about Harley Davidson. And that's really one of the importance of the Daily Caller, and that's why I pay to be a part of it. And I've always loved what you guys do. That you brought up this issue concerning Harley Davidson going woke, and then you had the Cowboy jump in and proving that I don't have a life, because I remember actually what happened about Bud Light and just these woke companies that pretty much forget who really funds them, which is the consumer.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's been the strangest part of all of these major corporations going woke, is that they've almost forgotten that, we are the force behind their profits. And so when you spit in the face of all of these people that have used your products, religiously for years and would swear by them and teach their kids about them. And, I have one of my friends, my husband and I, one of our friends from college is a Harley Davidson rider. And he's a Harley Davidson rider because his dad was a Harley Davidson rider and his grandfather was a Harley Davidson rider. And so, to see these three guys kind of go through this, I can't believe the people making my bikes hate me kind of process was really eye-opening for me. So I was glad to be on, Newsmax for that segment, because it hit home for me, and and I know it hits home for a lot of people where, just regular everyday Americans just tired of seeing these woke corporations try and, best us with their might and power, when in reality they get that might and power from us.
Well, and this comes back to your beat and your new newsletter, but never would we think in our world that we live in today, and it's certainly not the case, but the perception might be that a traditional family of a man, a woman, and kids is just plain weird, and it isn't, but that's the way they're programming our world to be. So you, as a wife, a mom, do you believe that your traditional American family valued lifestyle is an endangered species? Oh,
for sure. I mean, I see it just within our friend group. My husband and I I was 22 when we were married. My husband was 24. Everyone looked at us like, we had three heads. What were we thinking? What were we doing? We were throwing our lives away. All of that kind of stuff. We're one of the rare millennials that just went for marriage right away. And it's been the best thing that's ever happened to us. Every positive thing that happens in our life, we've done it in service of our family. And I think that type of thought process is really rare now in my generation, even probably rarer. And when you look at Gen Z, and but it's that thought process that built our country. It was the service of your family, of making sure that your legacy stayed intact and that you are an honorable member of society. And the family had a lot to do with that. And so I think the thing that I get most frustrated with whenever I'm talking to, other moms or, other parents at our girls' school is that, they'll say things like, oh, politics, they don't really mean anything. I'm not going to follow it. I have faith that, God's going to protect us. And while that is true, and you should have faith, especially if you're a believing Catholic or Christian, but whether or not you believe in politics, politics believes in you and is very much concerned in your daily life and is very much concerned in how you live your life. And so if the politics or fashion at the time doesn't, equate to what your moral beliefs are, they're going to try and make it extremely difficult for you to just sit back and live your life. And which is, kind of the point of my newsletter, hopefully, is to wake these parents up to realize that there is so much at stake if you sit out and ignore what the culture wars and ignore the politics of our society and what's going on, because, it's never been harder to raise a family than it is now.
Yeah.
My first newsletter was talking about cell phones and, the dangers of what that brings into our kids' lives. And I think that as a parent, you couldn't do a bigger disservice to your family than to set out and ignore what's going on in our political world.
Well, and then you have people, and even in Idaho, Mary, we experience it here on KIDO Talk Radio, where nobody wants to get involved. Nobody wants to be involved with politics because, it's controversial. And you're thinking, okay, if you peace out, then it's the government, it's the accountability that you deserve.
Yes, exactly. And so, I agree with that sentiment that you get what you get if you don't throw a fit kind of thing. And however, the people in our nation deserve so much better than what we have. We come from a long line of, hardworking Americans who built a country out of a wild wilderness. And I believe that we are owed our birthright, but at the same time, we have to pay for it every generation. Sometimes that means war. Sometimes that means culture war. And so right now we are in one of the biggest culture wars of since generations, I would argue since the sexual revolution. And so it's time for our generation of Americans to step up and pay their birthright and, kind of reclaim what it means to be an American and reclaim what it means to, lead a family through turmoil. And that's kind of where we are right now. And it's crazy to feel like you're in it. But at the same time, I feel blessed to be able to be a part of it in some way and hopefully make it easier for parents to understand and, stand up for their children.
Well, and again, as from one Catholic to another, sometimes it's a challenge whether you're in the Catholic Church or any Protestant church that the church goes woke. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's been the biggest realization for me as a Catholic is trying to sit back and disconnect the faith from the man. Sometimes I'm, disagree with Pope Francis on a lot of his decisions or who he brings to the Vatican, who he entertains, who he snubs, and especially when it comes to, say, his cracking down on the traditional Latin Mass and, these other decisions that he's made. However, we have a duty, just like we do in politics, to ensure that our faith lives on and that, it becomes, more than just the man. There's so much more behind it. So it makes me faithful or happy to see so many young Catholics kind of picking up that sword and continuing on the faith in such a traditional way and really promoting it in that way, because without new life coming in on the end, all the tradition dies out. And so, I've seen a resurgence in young Catholics, especially young Catholic women bailing at Mass and men bringing their young children and, kind of taking up that threshold. And so, it makes me hopeful that despite the wokeness at maybe like the higher levels, there's still that young family that is going to Mass every Sunday and is teaching their children how to live a traditional life and, teaching their children about honor and responsibility.
Yes. And you'll catch that. Okay, so you alluded to your new newsletter, which is about faith and family. Actually, let me just ask you the dumb media question. Mary, what's your new newsletter about?
Well, we like to say that it's, a mother telling true stories about culture, politics, and motherhood, just trying to explain how all of those three things are connected, even though they seem so far apart from each other. And essentially what I do is I talk about, things that have gone on in our family life and try and make them relatable to other people. For example, I talked about it earlier. My first newsletter that came out last Thursday, we discussed cell phones, which is obviously such a big thing in our society, and just the dangers behind them, and why we decided to say no to our kids when it came to cell phones, and kind of what they have to give up on their end as children not having them, but what it saves them from, and other friends of ours, and their decisions behind it, and all of those things. So next week we should have another great newsletter coming out on Thursday, and you'll be able to find it every week at thegoodlife.dailycaller.com. And I'm really excited about it. I think we had some really good momentum on the first week, and I think that it's going to be a success, and I think that it's going to be able to help a lot of parents who are a little bit lost. Like I said earlier, it's never been harder to raise children. It's also hard when you think you're the only one making these hard decisions, whether it's about technology or, whether it's about dating, or how do you handle homework, or how do you handle fights, or parenting in general, all of these things. And then whenever you talk about the issues with why are you single as a woman? Should you be looking at marriage in your 20s, and what are the benefits behind that, and what's the point of a husband anyway? And these kinds of questions I hope to be able to answer for, young singles who are looking for a way out of this morally corrupt society.
Well, and as you said, Mary, to let them know they're not alone. We'll get you out on this one. A couple of your headlines from the Daily Caller. Hidden deep inside, pro-Harris polling shows she's losing an important voter demographic, and despite the manufactured hype, the Kamala train is derailing.
Yeah, so, if you look at the New York Times Siena poll, everyone, has been praising that one for Kamala's, bump in the polls, and look, this is an A+ rating poll. But, hidden behind the A+ rating is the fact that they admitted in 2020 that they oversampled Democrat voters by 5%. And they know that they have a Democrat oversampling problem, but there's really not anything that they're going to do about it. But at the end of the day, even with the Democrat oversampling, it's showing that Kamala Harris is losing white male voters, especially white male blue-collar worker voters, by a large margin. And I think the biggest takeaway from this is that in 2016, these voters were the reason why Trump won. And it's looking like in 2024 it could give him the biggest chance of taking back the White House. Kamala Harris does not speak to these type of voters. She probably bought on Tim Walz thinking that he would be able to do that. You can kind of see it in the propaganda when surrounding him. They have the camo hat out. Oh, look at him. He's a hunter. Coach Walz, they call him, because he was the assistant coach of some JV football team. They're really trying to make him be like the Democrats' version of a man's man. And you can trust me because, look, I'm just a regular, typical man. But the way he comes out on stage, the way he presents himself as effeminate, all of these things, they're just not going to hit with blue-collar voters. However, when you look at the Trump-Vance ticket, it's completely opposite. You have Trump, who has traditionally been able to speak to these voters on his own very well and obviously galvanize that base, which makes up about 69% of the electoral voters in the United States. So whenever you're looking at Trump, he's already hitting that target, and then he brings on J.D. Vance, who not only is able to speak to them, but it is one of them. He grew up in this blue-collar town. He raised himself up, graduated from Yale, and then now has come back to ensure that others like him who lived similar life, had to deal with family members that went through, addiction, that went through hard times and, had this very traumatic childhood, that, he could help them raise themselves up. So I think that this is a good sign for Trump. And then also, whenever you see things like Chris Hayes, who tweeted out over the weekend, negative things about the Electoral College, you have to say to yourself, I bet you the internal polling here is even worse. And, Trump is doing pretty well on this front. So it's just about making sure that, his policies stay in line with blue-collar workers, that he helps the middle class. Those kinds of talking points are going to be really important for Trump.
Mary Rook, we appreciate you from the Daily Caller. You have a great day, ma'am.
All right, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Kevin.
All right, Mary Rook joining us. Check her newsletter out. And, of course, American Squad are available on Daily Caller. Don't forget our friends at Beacon Plumbing. They say stop freaking, call Beacon today.
KIDO Talk Radio. Your morning espresso starts right here. It's the Sean Hannity Morning Minute.
On the economy, and this is not Russia propaganda, I can't stand Vladimir Putin and think he's evil. However, I do believe that Ukraine should pay for the weapons if America is going to sell them to them. And I think Europe needs to do more. I'm very clear about that. But I think evil does exist. And I think Putin's invasion and killing innocent men, women, and children and wiping out entire cities in Ukraine, that is evil in our time. And I don't care what his geopolitical ambitions and territorial ambitions are. Mark Cuban made an odd comment. He's an interesting guy I've debated in the past. He says Kamala Harris's tax plan will kill the stock market, but he's still supporting Kamala Harris.
The Sean Hannity Show from coast to coast later today.
This is getting out of control. Our government is sinking $1 trillion in debt every 100 days. That's right, $1 trillion every 100 days. Do you want to bail the government out of debt? I didn't think so. I know I sure don't. This is Linda, and when I worry about the national debt, I turn to safe haven assets like gold and silver. And that's why we partnered with the highest rated gold company, Goldco. They have earned over 5,000 five-star reviews from tens of thousands of happy customers who diversified their savings with gold and silver. Today, Goldco is offering you up to 8 years in free IRA fees plus 8% instant match in bonus silver with a qualified account. Call 855-815-GOLD for free IRA fees, bonus silver, free gold, and silver info kit. What are you waiting for? Safeguard your money with physical gold and silver before it's too late. That's what I did. Call 855-815-GOLD, 855-815-GOLD. That's 855-815.
Appreciate the comments of Tea Party Bob and others as we continue to move along and, talking about the media and how we're going to see this all play out in Idaho and across the nation. Idaho will, of course, have to figure out what we're going to do with this ranked choice voting. Obviously, people are going to be, promoting this, and we'll be hearing the ads and seeing this. I don't really understand the benefit of it. I don't really understand the benefit of ranked choice voting. What is the benefit? That are we saying that political parties are bad? I mean, that's really, I guess, what we're saying. We're saying that people that have moved to Idaho, that have left-leaning California, that has really, done a number on the nation, done a number on what once was a great state. You're hearing the ads for Reagan. And I don't know about you, and that song Tears for Fears, everybody wants to rule the world. I didn't care for it at the time when it came out in the mid-'80s because it just seemed kind of a goofy song. But that's the song for the new Reagan movie. And I hope millennials, I hope Gen Z people go to see Ronald Reagan, the movie, and our friend Dennis Quaid, who plays Ronald Reagan. And I was talking to a friend of mine who just took a job from Augusta, Georgia to Columbus, Ohio. You talk about a culture shock. A culture shock that you have going from Augusta, Georgia to Columbus, Ohio. And he was talking about him and his wife. And by the way, unlike your humble host, these folks achieved a lot in life. One went to Notre Dame, played college baseball there. Another went to St. Mary's College, the sister school of Notre Dame. And they went to college in the Midwest, both Southerners. And now they are in the state of Ohio. And it's funny because sometimes my buddy, I'll just say his name's Adam, we call him the boss man. Sometimes the boss man east of the Great River doesn't realize who he's talking to because he knows me by my name. I wasn't going to say my given name, but the name he gave me, Charlie. And he goes, Charlie, me and my wife, we grew up with Reagan. And Reagan was like a surrogate father to all of us. And unbeknownst to the boss man, I've been saying that for years. And the boss man is a couple years younger than me, my friend Adam, who, just like me, is very passionate about what he does for a living, radio. And I'm thinking, bro, that's why I was always so critical on Clinton. That's why I was so critical on Obama. Because for 8 years, I was 12 when Reagan came into office. And when he left office, I was 20. And, you think about that. And those 8 years, we knew nothing but the Gipper. And no matter what happened, the Gipper was always going to be there for us. The Gipper was always going to be, everything was going to be okay. And we had Iran-Contra, and we had Gorbachev, and we had everything else. And one of the most, and I highly recommend this, I think I actually might go to one of my varying social media accounts that has a whopping 3 people following it, and put on the last speech of Ronald Reagan. And I hope this movie is a sellout and it's great, but I sit there and I'm looking at it and how Reagan made us all feel, and the dementia may have been kicking in, but how he loved his wife. And they didn't have the best relationship with their kids. You have Michael Reagan, outstanding talk show host. You have Ronald Reagan Jr., who's a lib. One of my great regrets moving to Idaho was when I was slated to take on Reagan Jr., but Channel 7 couldn't make that happen on an edition of Hardball after Obama's speech. That's how highly MSNBC thought of me, that we would go toe-to-toe with Chris Matthews. And you have Patty Davis. And he didn't have a great relationship with his kids, but he loved his wife. He loved America. And he loved us. And at the end of it, he talked about that he and Nancy are going to go off into the sunset, and thanked everybody for being a part of the Reagan Revolution. Is anybody happy about being part of the Biden bumbling, the Kamala capers? And I always worried about the kids that were raised under Obama, the kids that were raised under Clinton, especially Clinton, because that was the end of morality in America. Captain Harry, good morning. You're on KIDO Talk Radio with Kevin Miller.
Top of the morning, Kevin. Hopefully they don't shut me down 3 times since I've tried calling you. My phone just goes off.
Sorry, brother.
And they're after me. I'm on the list ever since the helicopter went by. And a little bit more to that story. Cowboy Calvin came out here and checked me out. And a couple days later, he had the helicopter buzz his house, and his phone started going wacko.
Hey, the lesson is nobody should be hanging out with you.
And he ain't the only one. I got about half a dozen buddies that don't want to call me no more. But I kind of want to touch it on the Harley Davidson deal. That I know a lot of bikers, and they're really the bikers are fired up big time. I'll tell you what, a lot of them guys aren't real good at voting, but they are this year. And thank you, Chameleon Harris. And Ronald Reagan was one of the last great super charismatic. I can't say that word. Charismatic, whatever. Had a hell of a personality. And,
you mean charismatic?
There you go.
Yeah,
there you go. I barely made high school.
You and me both, brother. We're good.
I'm all fired up here this morning, this telephone deal.
580-5436. 580-KIDO. Appreciate everybody being here as we roll along. Joining us now is our friend Ryan Schmelz of Fox News Radio. At one time, a pretty big deal. Today, we'll figure it out.
Well, it's a big deal.
Well, I mean, you used to be a big deal.
Oh, what? Am I not anymore?
TBD.
Yeah, and I'm sensing a heel turn coming from you.
Oh, I've turned already.
Yeah. The show was pretty good, I thought. Wembley Stadium looked hopping. Clearly not as many people as they had last time, but, everyone says that if AEW is dying, it didn't look like a dying wrestling company to me.
Yeah, your boy Jonathan Savage gets very defensive when I say last year you had 80,000 at Wembley. This year you had 50,000. It ain't going in the right direction, buddy.
Yeah, and you could say it's just like, okay, well, we've already done our wrestling show at Wembley, so now we can just don't have to go next year. Having a first time for something usually helps with ticket sales, that's for sure.
It does, and now the WWE will move in. By the way, this is not Wrestling Today with our insider Ryan Schmelz of Fox News Radio. We will talk about the big news, but I think you had a little Jonathan Savage envy from yesterday.
Oh, of course. I would love to have been there.
Well, no, I mean, been with us. He broke it down for us. And,
I bet he did. I bet he got an entire wrestling segment all to himself.
He really did. He really did, and he's still not a fan of CM Punk.
Well, we can let him have that opinion.
Boy, would J.D. Vance be like the CM Punk of politics?
He's got some, I don't know. I feel like I hadn't been around long enough to really make that judgment just yet.
Very good point on that, but he is getting a lot of attention.
He certainly is. I mean, well, when you're the vice presidential nominee and you're fairly new to the political system, I mean, you're going to get a lot of news-making moments, and he certainly had one recently when he said that former President Trump would veto a national abortion ban if it was brought to him to be signed. Yeah,
I did see that interview. It was, and people continue to make light of that. How important is that issue?
Well, I mean, it's considered a top 3 issue to us. We've got, according to our latest Fox News poll, economy far and away the top issue by like 30% or so. Then, tracking in the double digits, and I think these are the only 2 other issues in the double digits. You have immigration and abortion just about tied for the second and third most important issues. So it certainly is up there.
You think that debate's going to happen? We'll get you out on this one.
Good question. There have been times we didn't think the debates were going to happen, whether it was between Trump and Biden, then all of a sudden we got the debates squared away. There was a time we didn't know if the Harris-Trump debates were going to happen, then they scheduled them. And now we're in a position where we might not see the debates happen again, but they got it worked out the last 2 times, so I would expect them still to get this one worked out. We'll just have to see if there's any rule changes or anything like that.
Ryan Schmelz, we appreciate you, brother. Watch out for Jacob Fatu.
Yeah, exactly, and I'll maybe get an RKO from Savage if he makes a surprise appearance at the D.C. Bureau.
Take care, sir.
All right, see you, buddy.
Oh, man. We appreciate the patience of our great friend Congressman Fulcher as we talk a little pro wrestling with Ryan Schmelz of Fox News Radio. Congressman, always great to hear from you. How are you, sir?
Kevin, I'm doing well, and I appreciate you with your patience and when sometimes caller isn't calling at exactly the right time. So thank you for your patience.
I've learned a lot from you over my years here in Idaho, and the summer is over. Of course, you've been working nonstop in Idaho. I believe you're back in D.C., and, it's the grind. And obviously, point number 1, besides the presidential politics, sir, is the budget, right?
Budget's coming up, and I'm actually in North Idaho. I was able to travel in yesterday morning, and so I'm still in Idaho, and that's always a positive sign. But to your point, the budget is the next big deal on the docket when Congress returns and goes into session first part of September. You're going to see a number of different budgets come up again in the House. We'll grind through that. The Senate probably will not. At least that's been their history. And so we will wind up doing, or at least debating, what's called a CR, or continuing resolution. That's always frustrating to a lot of people. And you can see the stage kind of getting set for that now. That CR is, at least by the efforts of a lot of us, is going to include what's called the SAVE Act, Kevin. The SAVE Act is really important. What that basically says is you have to be a citizen to vote. And so that's going to be the debate on the table. Of course, for the most part, the Democrat side does not want to see SAVE Act as part of that budget resolution. And the Republicans, or at least this one, wants to see that in there. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a snapshot of what's coming down the road in terms of the next congressional fight.
Yeah. Now, again, I'm going to get a little pithy with you. I'm a little worried. You're spending a lot of time in North Idaho. I understand that's part of your district, but I'm a homer for us down here, and I know you're going to, Kevin, you never experienced Idaho, and you're right about that, sir. But North Idaho, they're very, very conservative, and obviously so are you, and so am I. But what are the issues you're hearing about from the folks in North Idaho, sir? Well, we had a great run up to that question. We're going to.
Oh, sorry, Kevin. The up here in the north right now, it's kind of a mining-centric discussion. As you know, I'm on the Natural Resource and Energy and Commerce committees. There's a lot of mining up in the north, and it's not very often I get a chance to actually meet with the mining community and actually see where they are, what they do, and some of the circumstances they're fighting with federal entities over. And so that's the immediate task today, and for this particular visit is to actually be on site with some of our mining interests here within the state. Idaho's got incredible bounty when it comes to natural resources, including a tremendous number of minerals that are on the critical mineral list. But yet here we are with all the expertise to do it, to harvest those minerals correctly, do it safely, efficiently, friendly to the environment. And in many cases, the federal government won't let that happen. So that's actually the mission right now, is to take some of this time and see it firsthand and learn firsthand from those situations.
Well, you bring up a very good point that a lot of us here in the South don't understand, that Idaho, we do have mines. We have coal mines. We have so many mines. And, Congressman Fulcher, when you look into the eyes of those people, those hard-working people, and not only have to deal with dangerous conditions, but then the federal government encroaching, what is your reaction to their issues and how the feds just want to just regulate us out of existence when it comes to being self-sustaining?
Well, it simply makes no sense, because there's certain minerals you absolutely have to have. I mean, we have to have antimony. We have to have molybdenum. We have to have lead. We have to have nickel, silver. These are things that are part and parcel to our everyday life. And so we're going to get those minerals somewhere. Well, if you don't allow yourselves to do it domestically, which is where you can regulate it. You can make sure that the environment is taken care of and there's accountability with the process. Or you can buy it from your enemies, China, Ukraine, India, Russia. And what are we doing? We're buying it from our enemies. And now it's getting even more complicated, because China is starting to restrict what they will allow us to buy. Yeah. And so here is a state like Idaho, and Idaho's not the only one. I mean, there's critical minerals in many states. We've got tremendous resources across the country. Our enemies are starting to restrict what we're allowed to buy, and the federal government, for the most part, is still hindering the harvesting of those minerals within the United States. Now, in fairness, most of these decisions to either regulate or sue if there's a project approved is done from the east. It's done by bureaucrats, or it's done by so-called environmental firms that aren't so environmental, that think they know best. They've never been here, probably. But that's where those decisions are made. But it simply makes no sense. We have the minerals under our feet, and we have the technology and the system to harvest it cleaner, more efficiently, more cost-effective than any place on the planet. And so the simple answer is do it efficiently, do it reasonably, do it inexpensively, do it environmentally sound, and provide what you need to the industries that need it.
Well, and like I said, I think I read that post on social media that you were talking about that yesterday on the idea that China now is trying to, cut us off and we need to be more and more self-sustaining. How do you see the presidential race heating up here? The Hill saying that Harris has a 55% chance of winning. They're not going to say that the hidden Trump voters, they're not going to talk about the real people, but it seems like we've divorced ourselves from reality, Congressman Fulcher, on KIDO Talk Radio, when the economy is bad, yet the media tells us it's good, and Harris is great, even though she's been responsible for this the economic fallout that we've had for the last 3.5 years under Biden.
Everything that's filtered to me, and I don't interact heavily with the Harris campaign, as you might imagine, but everything that's filtered to me through that campaign is complaints and charges by Harris, by Walz, that they've got all of these problems that they've got to save us from. The ramifications of the border, inflation, energy, foreign wars, all this kind of stuff. Well, what they're not pointing out is they're the ones who are in charge. If all this stuff is so bad and they're the ones complaining about it, then wouldn't it make some degree of sense that the American people would say, well, wait a minute, you're the ones in there. I mean, and they are. They've got the White House, they've got the administration, the executive branch, they've got the Senate, and frankly, many of the federal courts. And when I say they, I'm talking about the liberal, progressive left, and the Democrats. And so, and they also have pollsters, Kevin, and that's another important thing because we hear about these polls, and we've learned through a number of channels that some of these polls have been skewed to begin with. They're not objective polls. You can do anything you want with a poll if you put the parameters in a certain situation. And that's what I believe has happened in a lot of this. I think that the media is trying to build up this campaign into something that's much more grand than it actually is. You know that I tend to take an optimistic bent, but I'm also been around the block a time or two, and I see how some of these things work. So this is a very biased media. I think there's a lot of biased polls, and we have a campaign effort that, quite frankly, is a bankrupt one, trying to shift the blame from themselves, which is where it rightfully belongs, to an administration that hasn't been in office for 4 years. So if you reflect back 4 years ago, we didn't have problems with border or inflation or energy production or the foreign wars, and others. So I'm very skeptical when it comes to what I hear from the Harris campaign, and frankly, I'm looking forward to November. I think it's going to be a positive month for the conservative movement.
Well, it has to be because, again, we need to expand the lead in the House, get back the Senate, then we can get back to saving America.
You know, earlier, just a few minutes ago, you asked me about looking some of these people in the eye, the miners in the eye, and I didn't fully answer your question. What do you say to someone who is here? They're doing the work. They're physically operating the equipment and doing the hard work necessary in a very efficient way. And when you can't guarantee they can continue to do that job at any time because they can lose their permit at any particular time or not get it renewed. The uncertainty that exists in this industry, and it's not just mining, by the way, it's timber and many of the ag and grazing resources and industries that we have. What do you tell people when they just say, look, I just want to know I'm going to have a job within the next month or the next 6 months or the next year? And then you talk to the owners and the investors who say, it costs $100 million plus to get this operation off the ground. How do we go raise the capital necessary when we don't know if we're going to have a permit to operate? You spend the money and then you can't do anything with it. So, business can only thrive and prosper if there's a certain degree of a known commodity predictability in all this. And what we've done is we've stripped away from many of our industries, in this case, the mining industries, which is where I'm at now, the timber industry. We've stripped that away, and we've forced a lot of these companies either out of business or to do other things. And so that's another factor that, I'm learning and I'm struggling with as we try to navigate on behalf of some of our constituents here.
Congressman Russ Fulcher joining us. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. Congressman, anything else you'd like to share with us today, sir?
Well, Kevin, we're getting closer to November, and the conversations, understandably, are going to focus around what happens on Election Day and on the days leading up to it. The one thing that I think that I'd like to communicate on that front is we, as the conservative side, do need to vote early to take advantage of some of the absentee tools that are legal in Idaho, and just make sure that that Tuesday in November doesn't come up and we don't actually get it done. And that goes for other states as well. The conservatives, the Republicans in general, don't tend to do that, and because they disagree with some of those processes. I do as well. However, those are the rules, and if we don't abide by those, and if we don't take advantage of those circumstances, then we're going to be outshined at the polls. So just a reminder to everybody to make sure and get that done. Early voting is coming up just around the corner, and you're going to see ballots out there, and this is a big one. And I'll spare the commentary on just how important it is, but I'll just close with this. The House, the U.S. House has about a 2 to 3 vote majority right now, and if it weren't for that, there'd be a lot more bad things going on. And if we can't grow that and garner the Senate and the White House, then we've got a whole different dynamic that we're struggling with in this country, and it's not a good one.
Congressman Fulcher, always great to have you with us. We appreciate you making time for us. We really mean that. And like I said, your work is so important. We just want to let you know, sir, you're appreciated.
Okay, Kevin, right back at you. Thank you for your patience and understanding, too, in terms of some of our timing issues. Very thankful for you.
Have a great day, sir. Be safe.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Our great friend, Congressman Fulcher. Pro-Life returns. Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio. Liberal Steve wanted me to ask you, how's your uterus?
Yeah, right. Well, Liberal Steve, he's just a joke, And
well, now, what did you make of that great, compelling content we had? We had Congressman Fulcher, we had Ryan Schmelz, and now we have you.
Yeah, Ryan Schmelz.
Where do you think you're going to rank?
Well, it doesn't matter where I'm going to rank, but the thing I'm going to talk about ranks up there at the top. Now Ryan Schmelz was saying that abortion, baby murder is up at 2 or 3. Now, I don't know on whose scale, but on the Democrat scale, it's up at number 1 because they've said that they're going to make abortion their number 1 issue, and they're doing that, and we're not fighting back at all, our kind of people. Now, as soon as sperm meets egg, there's a new person on Earth, and we're murdering all these little babies with chemicals and surgical abortion, and so we're just killing our own kind. It's ridiculous. So we can't survive as a civilization, as a world, if we're going to do that kind of thing, because there is a God in heaven, and he doesn't approve of this. And so, if you think that you can win an election by being soft on baby murder, you can't do that, because God will not bless your efforts. Now, maybe rationally you think, well, I got to get the baby killer people to vote for me so that we can gain the presidency, and then we can start turning things around. Now, rationally, you'd think that that's all right. but it isn't. Because right now, no more babies should die. We should just say this is the end of it, and we should just attack the Democrats totally for just being there for killing babies right up until they're born. And in fact, in Minnesota, they have a rule that says that if the baby is intended to be killed in an abortion, the doctor can just let the live baby die. That's Governor Walz, doing that kind of stuff. And so when you have people like that running for the top spots in our nation, we are really crazy people for just putting up with any of that.
Yeah, but pro-life, and again, I'm not taking their side.
No, I know you're not.
But they are the enemy, and you have people, you go back to 2022, and it was all about the abortion issue. And the reason why I held you over is because what we're seeing here, and this is where this show can go toe-to-toe with any show in the nation. And we don't really care about that, but this is why people always talk about that this show is special. What the Democrats are doing is what Karl Rove did in 2004. And what Karl Rove did in 2004, he knew it was going to be a base election. It was, I want to say Romney, but it was Kerry and Edwards versus Bush and Cheney. So Bush had a little fatigue going. And, he had spats with John McCain. So what they did was, and it shows you the Democrats are not original. You remember in 2004, what was on the ballot? What was on the ballot was gay marriage or traditional marriage. So every state that they could, it was a brilliant strategy by Rove to gin up the base, to gin up people to vote. Marriage is on the ballot. And oh, by the way, you can vote for Bush for president, who wants traditional marriage, wants marriage to stay the same between a man and a woman. What we're seeing now with the libs, especially with Joe Biden, they knew Joe Biden needed help. Now they've got wonderful Kamala, but they're still in Georgia and these other states. They are doing the Rove strategy. That's why abortion is on the ballot. Now in Idaho, it's very fascinating because the liberals are losers. Let me repeat that. There's not one talk show host in Idaho that will say it. The liberals are losers, number one. Number two, so what the losers are going to do, the loser liberals, is they're going to try and change the game by coming up with this bogus, morally bankrupt rank choice voting. And again, no one else in Idaho that pretends to be a conservative, that pretends to be a Republican, that pretends to speak for you will have the guts to say it. Rank choice voting is the end of conservatism and the Republican Party. And what they're trying to do is, because they're losers in the legislature, they're losers at the ballot, they're going to go with these referendums. We saw it with education. We're seeing it now with ranked choice voting. And coming up next, abortion.
Yep. Yeah, you're right about that. That was a very good summary. And I remember back to 2004. But anyway, we have to go. We have to save the babies, and we have to go to LGBTQ, and we just have to rip into them just because they are totally ridiculous. They're supporting the pharmaceutical industry that's tearing us apart through vaccinations, and we're addicted to pharmacy and farm chemicals that are causing us to have all kinds of diseases, and we don't say anything about that.
Well, you can say it, but then you get it. Thank you, Pro-Life, for the call. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. That's KIDO. Any of the program, you can always go to our website or wherever you get a podcast and be like the folks in Sandy, Utah, or San Jose, California, or Tucson, Arizona, or somewhere in Texas. We could read all the place where people are going and doing things to get our podcast, but we love you here in Idaho. Phone number's here, 580-5436, 580-KIDO. As we break down other big stories of the day, the big one nationally has to be what the heck is going to happen with this debate, because quite frankly, you have the national media taking Kamala's side, and when you have real-life issues like the folks in Virginia that are wondering what the heck happened to their America. Now, Virginia, which has been solidly Democratic for a long time, is a swing state when you have people concerned about nonpartisan issues.
We found Ricky Gaines waiting for his takeout order.
What do you look for when you're looking for a leader or somebody to vote for?
Someone that's fair, someone that's consistent.
This Army veteran says he's now worried about safety here at home.
I think crime, that kind of keeps me up at night. The drugs, the crime, we've got to police that up.
Yeah, he's right about that. He is very right about that. We've got to police it up. Well, are you going to go with 3.5 years of Joe and Cammie? Or are you going to go with Donald Trump that's going to bring back law and order? That's really what you have. And Idaho can only hold on so long. By the way, I want to thank Mrs. Miller for this one. We'll talk about it coming up next. Why more people will be moving to Idaho, and it's because California, and we're not making this up, because we have like 27,000 subscriptions. This one from Politico. A first-in-the-nation California proposal could make undocumented immigrants, in other words, illegal immigrants, eligible for $150,000 in state-supported home loans. Just as immigration has become an incendiary topic in the presidential election. That story next, plus more of your calls. Don't forget our friends at Beacon Plumbing. We love Beacon Plumbing. BeaconPlumbing.net. Beacon Plumbing. Stop freaking. Call Beacon. Water heater go out. Call Beacon Plumbing. Toilet stuffed up. Call Beacon Plumbing. Please call our friends at Beacon Plumbing. Hey, IDO. Now, you kind of take a look at the idea of the First Amendment. And Mark Zuckerberg, did you hear about this? The Zuck has said that he was a bad Zuck and that he would not have had the Biden administration. He would not have bent the knee to the Biden administration if he could do it all over again. Really? Really? By the way, you can always follow me on Twitter at Kevin Miller Show or any other social media platform. I love this. Elon Musk parody followed you. How many followers of that? A whopping 148. Thank you, Elon Musk parody. The online presence continues. Let's get to this. What's that, Sweet William? Oh yeah. Let's get to, don't talk about what Tom Cotton has to say. Let's go to headline from Politico. California Democrats want to help undocumented immigrants buy homes during presidential race. Now, don't tell Mrs. Miller this, but I do think that I should be, doing these as tax, what do they call that? Tax deductions. That I subscribe to just about every newspaper known to man. And one of them is the Washington Post. And the Washington Post, again, politically, I don't care for them, but their feature stories are really incredible. So the Washington Post, here's the headline. And it was very similar to another story. Where was I reading it? Well, that was the Washington Post as well, where they're talking about the working poor. And barely surviving, some flight attendants are facing homelessness and hunger. And here you have a woman who, she just started being a flight attendant. She's driving Lyft, working side hustle gigs, because her projected pay is $23,000 a year before taxes, insurance, and chasing the extra money she felt necessary. She's working at the Frontier Airlines from 3 to 10. Kate turned back to Lyft by the time she reached the bonus. See, if you do 120 rides in 4 days, you get $500. She'd gone nearly 400 hours without sleep. So here you have hardworking Americans, some of them living out of their cars, some of them living on the streets and working a full-time job, like the lady who lives in her van but has a very successful dog grooming business that we heard about last week. Now we have California. Well, if you're an illegal, can we still say illegal here? It's Idaho. We haven't gotten Obama yet. Thank you, Sweet William. You can be eligible for $150,000 in state-supported home loans. Are you kidding me? Now, California's legislature, and again, I know in Idaho we don't like to say this, stupid liberals. The California legislature this week, where the Democrats, the liberal Democrats, the dumb Democrats, the irresponsible Democrats, enjoy a supermajority, and the state has the largest share of the illegals in the country. Gallivanting Gavin Newsom declined to say whether he'd sign the measure if it clears the State House, He would likely make a decision while Republican nominee Donald Trump criticizes Harris over the influx of the illegals into California. This is just going to send more and more people to Idaho. Think about houses in Idaho. They're too expensive. Everything's too expensive. Everything stinks. And now you're going to give $150,000 to the illegals? 580-5436, 580-KIDO. More on that in a minute. Let's go to Lee in Meridian with Kevin Miller on KIDO Talk Radio. Lee, thank you for the call.
Hey, yeah, about Zuckerberg. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clearly.
Okay, good. I'm on Bluetooth. Just wanted to make sure. So, it's really frustrating because, you've got relatives and friends who only get their news source from mainstream media, or Facebook, or, doing Google searches, and then coming to find out, and thank goodness to Elon Musk, because he kind of blew the lid off of the censorship complex that we have coming from our federal government. Most people don't know this, but when Elon Musk took over Twitter, he discovered that not only was the federal government paying Twitter to censor content, the lead counsel for Twitter was the ex-lead counsel for the FBI. They had so much control inside Twitter over information that it was practically government run. And we see the tentacles of the federal government in everything now. And you can do certain Google searches, not right now, today, and you won't find any results on a lot of legitimate stories that the media or the government ultimately doesn't want us to know. And, it's great to hear Zuckerberg say that, but we need people of character to hold our government accountable and say no. Over the past multiple years, we've had so many lies told to us by our government and by the media that's why people are waking up and just getting so frustrated. Even right now with Kamala Harris, do you really believe that you've got a presidential candidate? We obviously know she's actually not been elected or won any specific elections to even be in the position she's at. But when she ran for president before, she had 1% of the vote. She went out first round. She had the worst vice presidential rating in history. And everybody in the media was kind of pouncing on her. And then as soon as Biden's out, she's just this wonderful person. And the media's tune has 100% changed. And now they're saying that the polls are neck and neck. And I'm just not buying it at all. It's completely manipulated. And I think that the problem is, and I'm trying to figure out how is it that they've done this. And the only thing that makes sense is that the elites in our country and even in the world, and I think the media elites go into this as well, I think they're all compromised. I think they're being manipulated and controlled because they have no say, and if they don't toe the line, they will be destroyed.
You're right. Look, if Zuckerberg had decided to stand up to them, he would have been done. They would have gotten him. Lee, thank you for the call. More of your calls next. Don't forget, Lars Larson today at 4. You're listening to Idaho's talk station, KIDO Talk Radio. Can you say it with me?
KIDO.
KIDO Talk Radio. Okay, we are talking about Mark Zuckerberg saying that he wishes that he didn't bend the knee, that he didn't kiss the ring of Joe and Hunter. Also, California giving $150,000 for illegals to buy homes. We'll talk a little bit about that story coming up next with Dave Petzel. But first, here is our man, Josh Hawley. Now, if you had to pick between, that would be the toughest thing to pick between Josh Hawley and Tom Cotton. Who would be the better president of the United States? So here we have Senator Hawley. Man, this computer's running wild. Talking to good old Secretary of Homeland Security, Alexandro Mayorkas. I know, I can't even pronounce it correctly. Everybody, they show off their pronunciation. The same people that go, Mayorkas, they can't pronounce Smith. Anyway, let's get to Josh Hawley saying, did you pressure Mayorkas? Now tell me the truth, Marky Mark. Did you pressure social media companies to lie, to censor, to deplatform, to take people down?
Earlier this year that you disbanded the Disinformation Governance Board, which I thought was totally unconstitutional, but that turns out to be at best misleading. That's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what you're doing. Your own quadrennial review, which was just reported in the press, says that disinformation is going to be the new focus at DHS. The Quad Review says that DHS plans to target, I'm quoting now, inaccurate information domestically on a wide array of subjects, including, quoting, the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic, the efficacy of COVID-19 vaccines, racial justice, U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, and the nature of U.S. support for Ukraine. A federal judge has just found as a finding of fact, Mr. Secretary, that your office, and I'm going to quote now, is supervising the nerve center of federally directed censorship. Here's another email, August 20th, 2021. Facebook writes again to HHS and highlights that Facebook is increasing the strength of our demotions for COVID and vaccine-related content. April 16th, 2021, Rob Flaherty at the White House circulates a Zoom meeting invitation to Twitter employees stating White House staff will be briefed by Twitter on vaccine misinformation. We have example after example of this administration coordinated, apparently, according to a federal court, by your agency, pressuring, coercing social media companies to engage in censorship. Is that constitutional?
That is unequivocally false.
Is what the emails show.
It is unequivocally false, Senator.
You are not pressuring the big tech companies to...
Now remember, Elon Musk, when he bought Twitter, and they didn't want him to buy Twitter, uncovered it. Zuckerberg. And really, what does Mark Zuckerberg stand for these days? I don't know. But he admitted he was pressured.
Take down accounts. You are not meeting with them to ask them to censor on your behalf.
That is correct. We are not.
Mr. Secretary, it has been established for years in this country, as you very well know because you're a lawyer, that the federal government may not use private third parties to engage in activities that are unconstitutional. That's exactly what you and this administration are doing. You are leveraging private companies to carry out censorship on your behalf. It's dystopian, but worse than that, it's unconstitutional.
And it's dystopian. Now, again, here is lying Mayorkas on KIDO Talk Radio.
So false.
We know it's true. If this guy were a Republican, he would have been fired already because the media would be outraged. Because he's in their camp, they let it roll. We're not going to let it roll. We'll continue to hold them accountable. KIDO Talk Radio, thank you for joining us on the side that loves America. That's right. We love America.
Good morning, Kevin. KIDO Talk Radio traffic from the Idaho Pizza Company studio. Seeing a little crowding, especially through the Meridian area on the eastbound freeway. Out of Nampa, though, expect some heavy spots as well around those exits. And the bright sunshine is causing some slowing. Not any major delays, though, to report so far. Deer Flat and Linder, a crash on the right shoulder. Fairly Reliable Bob's is your local family-owned and operated car dealer, a landmark in Boise for over 49 years. Fairly Reliable Bob's has been right on the corner and right on the deal since
Talking since his first book came out on Nick Saban, The Leadership Secrets of Nick Saban. John Talty joins us to talk about his new book, The Price, What It Takes to Win in College Football's Era of Chaos, along with Armin Katayan. Mr. Talty, thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you here in Idaho, sir.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, first and foremost, when we take a look at how college football has changed, for people that aren't familiar with your work, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Are you a fan? Are you a journalist? I mean, I know all about you, but how did you come up with this project, and what have you learned?
Yeah, I think I'm both. I think to take on something like that, a project like this, I think you have to love college football. But I think there's things that I think we've all seen happening that I think has made people wonder, what the future it's going to look like. And to me, it just feels like college football is at this inflection point right now where it's been a chaotic last few years from, name, image, and likeness and the transfer portal hitting really around the same time. Conference realignment has reshaped college football in many ways. We've got a 12-team playoff that goes into effect this year. There's just a lot of big change that's happening. And I think what we wanted to do is really dig deep and see how that was impacting people at every level. And so we focused on, some bold-faced names like Nick Saban and Jim Harbaugh, but also, what a 5-star quarterback is going through in kind of the era of NIL, what it's like for the NCAA as they fight what feels like an uphill battle, trying to, have relevance really, but also to try to enforce its rules. And so we try to give you a 360 in-depth look at what it's really like in college football right now, because we talked to a lot of people and quite a few of them said, they've been doing it 30 years or 40 years or even 50 years, and that this last 3-4 year period has been the most chaotic that they have seen during their careers.
Well, you make it sound so easy, but getting access to these people, we caught you on CBS Saturday Morning along with Armen Keteyian, who is, as you know, sir, has written so many books, was a CBS correspondent for 60 Minutes, wrote that great book, I think it was called The Program, concerning Mike Leach and the changes that were happening there. So these folks are fairly secretive, are they not? I mean, they just didn't say, hey, Mr. Talty, let me tell you how I'm really feeling. It must have taken a lot of work to get their trust to get the insights for your book, The Price.
It was an extremely challenging book. There's no doubt about it. And it was hard for a lot of reasons. It was hard to get access and get people to talk to you. It was hard to keep up with things that were seemingly changing every single day. And it was hard to, try to report a book like this. It's not all, rainbows and butterflies. There are some things in here that I think are very revealing in positive ways and maybe for some of the people involved in negative ways. And it's just, Armen and I have talked about it. And in many ways, it was, a high wire act. It was just trying to balance all these different things and do so in a, professional and appropriate manner. But it was really tricky. And so I can't even tell you the amount of phone calls that, Armen and I probably had early mornings when, can you believe that this happened? Or, I can't believe this thing is now that we got to deal with. And so there was a lot of, evolution of this book along the way, a lot of things we had to change along the way. But, the end product is something that, I know that I'm really proud of. I know that Armen's really proud of. As you mentioned, he's written quite a few books, and he's told me he puts this one at the top of any of them. When you consider the magnitude of his career, that certainly meant a lot to me. And I know it's genuine because I know how much he put into this book and how tough it was for both of us to kind of come through on the other side. But I think the end result is really strong. And, all the feedback we've gotten so far has been great.
Well, you've been the Nick Saban whisperer for quite some time. Can you take us through the process of Nick Saban deciding to leave the greatest run in college football history? Arguably, he would be favored to win the national title this year.
Yeah, I think it's, so the name of our book is called The Price. And, in some ways that's a play on, all the money that's infiltrated the sport. But, we also look at it as, it's the price that everyone within the sport is paying right now to try to be the best. And when you think about Nick Saban, in his early 70s, he's been paying that price for, 50-something non-years. And I think eventually it took its toll. I think this is a man who, is the greatest college football coach of all time. And, as you mentioned earlier, I wrote a previous book about him. And one of the things that I pointed out in that book was just his ability to adapt and evolve. And I think he's one of the greats to do that. I do think that the NIL era was hard for him to get his arms around. I think it was hard for him to evolve around it. I think it went against some of the ideals that he has in terms of building a culture, developing players. He had coached in the NFL, so it's not like he's foreign to the idea of players getting paid. And it's not against players getting paid, but I think he wanted regulations and rules. And I think the unregulated nature of what college football has been for the last few years was very challenging for him. I think one of the things you need to know about Nick Saban is the top of the list is control. He's a guy who likes to control everything he does during his day, whether that's wearing the same thing, eating the same thing for breakfast, doing the same thing for lunch. He's all about routines and control. And I think, guys essentially being free agents every year, being able to walk into your office, demand money, and if you don't give it to them, immediately leave. That was really hard for him to really rectify, and ultimately was one of the primary reasons why he's, going to be on our TVs on College Game Day on Saturday and not on the sidelines getting ready to face Western Kentucky.
You write about a gentleman that most people in the country outside of Alabama aren't familiar with, Jimmy Rain, obviously Yellowwood. I can remember years ago on the sideline of Auburn, he's berating Tommy Tuberville at the time. But it is a symptom of the boosters really running things. So have the boosters taken over with NIL and the transfer portal?
Yeah, they've never had more power. And, as you mentioned, these guys, they didn't just, pop up out of nowhere. Quite a few of them, especially in the South, especially in the SEC, have been operating behind the scenes for a while now. I don't think that's breaking any news that they're, what we affectionately refer to as bagmen who helped, make sure players got money. But they've never had more power than they do right now. And I think Lane Kiffin was the first one that I saw put out this perspective, but I've heard it from other people since that, right now some of these boosters, they're almost like mini NFL owners where you can have a major say on the personnel that are on your favorite team. And, that can lead to some challenges. Certainly it can be, fun to feel like you're having a major say. I really want my favorite team to have that quarterback. I'll kick in $1 million to help facilitate that. And, it's something that, coaches have to deal with, and the power that those guys have now. I do think it makes people uncomfortable on all sides, right? I think that it makes, coaches and administrators uncomfortable that that level of power has been ceded, outside of the operation. And I know that it makes the people involved uncomfortable. I'll give you a quick little anecdote, but, one of the people we talked to is the guy who runs the Maryland Collective. And he told me this story where he met the new basketball coach, Kevin Willard, for the first time. And the athletic director said, Kevin, this is the most important person from Maryland basketball. And he told me, it's like, afterwards, I felt like kind of gross. He's like, I don't want that power. It's like, I just want to be a fan. Like, I got sucked into this role to try to help out because I've got a business background, but I don't want to be known as the most important person for Maryland basketball. And so I think some people have run to that power, and I think others are uncomfortable with it and are, looking forward to in the next year or so when that stuff either comes in-house or we're just seeing the revenue share that comes with a salary cap.
Mr. Talty, we could go on, but I have to ask you about the Group of Five, particularly for a unique program like Boise State, which has such national name recognition but very limited resources. What does this all mean for people like Boise State or Liberty or the Sun Belt or any of these other teams outside the big leagues?
Well, I think the positive is the 12-team playoff expanding and there being a, automatic bid for a Group of Five team, the top Group of Five team. And I think it's still very early, but I think when you see a lot of those projections right now, either Boise State or Liberty are usually the two that you see. So that, I think, is a path. Is there a world in which, again, if that automatic bid stays there, that you could build yourself as, we are the king of the Group of Five and able to do things a little bit differently. And, hey, why don't you come here? Easier path to the playoff. You got a chance to play in some really important games in December. I think it's a little bit of a cliche and a little overused, but I do think a Boise State type, a Liberty type, they have to moneyball it a little bit. I think that they have to, find out what are the ways that we can get the best bang for our buck. Can we develop? Can we find, maybe we're getting 3 stars instead of 4 and 5 stars, but can we really develop those guys and get them some money, maybe not all the money, but some money to stay and want to, build this thing that we're doing. So it's a challenging time for Group of Fives. There's no doubt about it. The money keeps getting bigger and bigger for the SEC schools and the Big Ten schools. That money is not rising at the same level for Group of Five, and so that gulf is getting wider. But I do think there's a lane for some schools, if they're willing to invest to a certain level, that there's that easier path to the playoff, and then can you build off of that and build the momentum and also, take some of those players that maybe are at an Alabama or at a Georgia and they're not starting and say, hey, if I go to Boise State, if I go to Liberty, I can start right now, and that team's pretty good, and I might get to play in the playoff. Maybe that's worth it for me. So I think they're going to have to be aggressive in that regard.
Well, certainly you're aggressive in your book, Mr. Talty. Like I said, man, just a fan here in Idaho, no agenda, just love your work, love you with Paul, and really very proud of your work and what you've done, and congratulations on the price.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate you.
All right, there we have it. John Talty joining us. And I know you're going to go, well, Kevin Miller, don't be, the goof talking about sports. I know there are a lot of people that talk about sports, but the idea of college football, and now it's going to the highest bidder, and it's amazing. And maybe maybe you've reached a point in life where you're a parent or you're a grandparent, and in the old days it was about you being the very best and you doing this. I see this, and Mr. Talty's probably in his early 40s or late 30s or maybe even his early 20s, but the kid writing this book, and I say that with the utmost respect, with Armen Keteyian. This impacts us a lot in a way, even though maybe we're not big sports fans, but the idea of public funds going into universities, public funds going into supporting academics and athletics. You heard yesterday Dave Petzo talking about private equity. If private equity is going into this, you don't need tax breaks anymore. So, again, a little insight. You're going to go, well, Kevin Miller, what about Trump? Kevin Miller, what about this? We're gonna get to that coming up. Looks like the debate's going to happen. Kamala's running wild. There was an incident at Arlington. A lot going on. We sure appreciate you joining us here on KIDO Talk Radio. Don't forget our friends at Beacon Plumbing. They always tell you to stop freaking. Call Beacon. We appreciate their support of this fine endeavor we call the Kevin Miller Show in the morning. KIDO Talk Radio. From The Price. And just an outside perspective of just the big money that is infiltrated and really ruined college football. But I'm a true believer. I went out and bought my little book here. Didn't get a comp copy or anything, but I've got my little fanboy. And a lot of people, they do good things. They donate to charity. They do this, or maybe they have a hobby like RVing or camping. As I've said before, my hobby is buying books. So there we have it. Full disclosure. By the way, very interesting story on our website, KIDO Talk Radio. Why so many people are coming from that state that will not be mentioned to Idaho. We decided to do a story on that state, and a lot of people are, the idea of California-isms, whether it's the license plates, whether it's this, whether it's that, whether it's the annoying people in the supermarket. Here's a good one. You can always tell a Californian when. And I'm not talking about the good Californians. I'm talking about the bad ones where they just get off the boat. They're in the supermarket. They take up the whole lane. They're on the phone. They think that being in the supermarket, it's like, some type of thing that they need. I've got the raviolis. I've got the SpaghettiOs. And you're thinking, ma'am, please, can I just get by to get my generic macaroni and cheese? You think about that. So that story on our website. Other fallout, Mark Zuckerberg continuing to say that he's sorry that he lied. He's sorry that the White House censored him. He's sorry that he went along with it. Why? Because Biden and Kamala and everybody else are going to continue to do this. They're going to continue to push until they take everything over. In other words, you're just going to have to ask, is nothing sacred with them? And Zuckerberg has figured out that if he doesn't stand up for Facebook, it's going to be Biden book, if you will. Right? Biden book. And nobody wants Biden book, especially the Zuck.
Good morning. And the reason that we know about this letter that Mark Zuckerberg sent to Jim Jordan is because Jim Jordan posted it. So about COVID censorship, Mark Zuckerberg writes, in 2021, senior officials of the Biden administration, including those from the White House, repeatedly pressured our teams for months to censor certain COVID-19 related content, including humor and satire, and expressed significant frustration when we did not meet their demands. I believe the government pressure was wrong, and I regret that we were not more outspoken about it. On that point, a few minutes ago, a White House official told us, when confronted with a deadly pandemic, this administration encouraged responsible actions to protect public health and safety. Our position has been clear and consistent. We believe tech companies and other private actors should take into account the effects their actions have on the American people while making independent choices about the information they present. And that's not all. Zuckerberg is also writing about Hunter Biden censorship. He says, When we saw a New York Post story reporting on corruption allegations involving then Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden's family, we sent that story to fact checkers for review and temporarily demoted it while we were waiting for a reply. It's since been made clear that the reporting was not Russian disinformation, and in retrospect, we should not.
Thank you, Peter Ducey. We'll get back to that. Remember, when you hear Fox News on the radio, you're listening to KIDO Talk Radio. Here's something. If you have a problem with your spouse, if you have a problem with a family member, if you have a problem with people at work, it used to be fake news. The new one is Russian disinformation. Kevin, you didn't do your report correctly. Russian disinformation. Kevin, you were late to work. Russian disinformation. Kevin, you need to stay late. Russian disinformation. That's a good one. Let's just blame it on the Russians. Putin was behind it. Putin. Phone number is 580-5436. 580-KIDO. The selling of college football as we continue on. It's not about athletics or coaching. It's more about big money. So now here we have it. Mark Zuckerberg, who probably now will be indicted, telling the truth about Joe Biden's censorship.
Have demoted the story. I asked President Biden about this. At the time, his team was apparently trying to censor this Hunter content.
You still think that the stories from the fall about your son Hunter were Russian disinformation and a smear campaign, like you said?
Yes. God love you, man. You're a one-horse pony.
And we've still never heard anybody from the White House come out to admit what we all now know, that it was not Russian disinformation, despite what President Biden said there at the end of 2020 and what his team told us once they took office in 2021. Back to you.
Hey, Mr. One Horse Pony.
Just reminding us of those sound bites.
So even, I think, over a year in office, you asked Jen Psaki about the same thing, and they stuck to their guns. They said, absolutely, it was Russian disinformation. So that was apparently just their line?
Yes, and they continued to treat that letter that was signed by a couple dozen former intel agents who were talking about their opinions of Russian disinformation. That remained the gospel here. And again, we know that this is not Russian disinformation. Yeah. But we've never actually heard anybody correct that the way that Mark Zuckerberg.
Right. So breaking news, Mark Zuckerberg is about ready to be indicted. And here we have people thinking that this is a close presidential race. This alone should cause Biden and Harris to both step down. Who would be the Speaker of the House? It would be Mike Johnson that would be the president. Now, that's a good idea. Hey, by the way, thank you for joining us. Appreciate you being here. You're listening to Live Local Talk about the issues that matter to you with me, good old Kay Milley. So here we have it. It's official. Censorship has been confirmed. And really, what's happening next? Censorship by the government. If this were Donald Trump, he'd be in jail. Oh, that's right. They're trying to get him in jail again. We'll talk about it next. Fox News on your home for Fox News, KIDO Talk Radio. We've been talking about this morning, and I always go back to this, and I'm sorry if it sounds just redundant again and again and again. But if you are a fan of Netflix, just go check out Seinfeld. Jerry Seinfeld was so brilliant. And there's a bit there, and we've played it before, where you can't say anything because everybody is offended. Everyone is offended. And today, here we are, where you can't say anything stupid. Now, again, was the guy in Milwaukee that made fun of Tim Waltz's kid wrong? Yes. There is no benefit to making fun of kids. And look, this is from somebody who, like John McCain in the day, made fun of Chelsea Clinton's looks. It's a different world. And by the way, as I've said before, we as conservatives have to be better than just about everything. We have to be above reproach because the media will not cut us any slack. So earlier on Fox News, The Five, Jesse Waters said something, and he's in a little hot water. Let's take a listen.
Since Kamala boasted about being the, quote, last person in the room when Joe Biden decided to go ahead with the Afghanistan withdrawal. Jesse, people consider you to be the last person in the room because that's because everybody keeps trying to ditch you.
Yeah, they just left. Right. But you understand the reference, Greg.
Yes.
Is that she was somehow involved in the decision, and it was her wise guidance that he was relying upon. Listen, she was the last in the room in Afghanistan. She was the border czar, and she was the deciding vote on trillions of inflationary spending. On those three most popular Joe Biden items, she's basically like a conjoined twin. You cannot separate the two. And let's talk about foreign policy. What is her foreign policy? And this is where the president has his most impact. You have a lot of room to maneuver there as commander-in-chief. We don't know who she is. We don't know what she believes. She's going to get paralyzed in the Situation Room while the generals have their way with her.
Yeah. And this is what happens. And I know a lot of people love Jesse Waters, and Jesse Waters is good, Jesse Waters is bad. Being the frat boy, as Terry Ford, who used to work here on the sports station when we had one, lectures me, being the frat boy or being the controversial one or being everything else just doesn't work. Even though Jesse Waters didn't mean anything by it, it was a bad take.
Right now,
Jesse,
I don't like that. Figuratively, again,
take it back.
Have their way with her, control her, not in a sexual way.
In a weird way, this guy, Jesse Waters, who a lot of people like, a lot of people think has a brilliant future, by just saying that is the world that we live in today, he could lose his job just like that, just for saying that. Didn't mean anything by it. He was playing the frat boy act. He. Well, it's a different world. Again, Fox is 5 on KIDO Talk Radio.
To me, don't listen to Jesse. Listen to me.
Well, on that note, maybe listen to this. There's been some attention to comments I made on the show yesterday about VP Harris. People are misconstruing my comments to mean something inappropriate.
But remember, Jesse straddles the line with the double entendre quite a bit. You just can't go there. That's why the guy that has this figured out and has for years is Sean Hannity. You just don't go there, because otherwise it's going to be advertiser boycotts. Otherwise it's going to be this, it's going to be that, and Jesse's going to be out of a job.
I wasn't suggesting anything of a sexual nature. I was expressing my opinion that Vice President Harris's current leadership style could be an issue if elected.
When you have to explain something that you've said, having been there, having had people from New York that make millions of dollars listening to you as you're struggling to make your payments to afford your life and your 2 dogs in a place we'll just call Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and knowing millions of dollars are on the line at that small local radio level. And then when you have to do this, Jesse was told to do this because, again, there's no Roger Ailes. There's no one watching the back of conservatives at Fox. I know what you're saying, Kevin Miller. I'm just going to work. Kevin Miller, I could say what I want with the boys, the girls. To a degree, you can. But just as a cautionary tale, you can't do that. Now, they can make up stories about Donald Trump and a golden shower. They can make up stories about everything else. But in the end, it can cost you everything for doing those things. And Jesse Waters doesn't have to go there, but that is his role. Kind of a, how should I put this, a street version of Tucker Carlson and Bill O'Reilly. He just speaks to the folks. Granted, but you just can't go there, Jesse.
Coming up.
And we'll see how that plays out, and we'll see if Jesse Waters is a big enough fish that people will go after. And then you're going to have people that are going to make up lies about Fox, and they're going to make up lies about everything else. And they're going to go, see, this is what those mean guy conservatives are. This is what those mean guys are. If you can't say something in church, if you can't say, and this has taken me a long time to figure out, if you can't say something in front of your family, then quite frankly, you can't say it in public, or you shouldn't. Just saying. By the way, you're going to love this. Apparently, the vice president has scrubbed Berkeley and Canada out of her life story. I don't know what the Canadians did to upset the vice president, but we'll get into that. Phone numbers here, 580-5436, 580-KIDO. AJ wants to react to Jesse Waters. Good morning. You're on KIDO Talk Radio with Kevin Miller. Thank you for the call.
Hey, Kevin, you got me a little bit, by the scruff of the neck because I'm not quite sure all that he said. But I will say this, is if we don't say things when we know they're wrong, especially in this world, well, we can just wait for 70 years till after JFK is murdered and find out the facts.
Well, we still haven't found out the facts, brother. You know that.
But we know what they are at this point. And look at the Clintons, everything they did with, him and Monica Lewinsky, and then her in Benghazi, her with the FISA warrants. All of these things, it takes years for us to extract, and we still don't get all the facts. We've got a weaponized, police force in America that are working with politicians to be sure that they're remain in power. And the only reason why people want other people to remain in power is going to benefit them. One way or another, it's benefiting them. It could be promotion, it could be money, it could be all kinds of things. It's dirty. I was in a position as a regional director in California at one point, and I found out one of our VPs was working a business, and he had the company pay for the entrance into it. And because I was the controller as well, I saw it on record, and I looked up the state secretary's information on it, found that he had given $30,000 supposedly to buy in his business that the company paid for him. I go, what? You can't do that. So you got to be able to speak up, and I lost my job for bringing it up, but I don't care.
Doesn't that stink? You did the right thing. And right. That's the way, most employers are today. They don't want the truth. They don't want anything else except when it's convenient for them.
Well, no, it's not only because of that. It's because everyone else in the upper echelon of the company was involved in doing stuff like that as well. So no one wants to get exposed because then everyone gets exposed. And that's pretty much, I got to say this, 80% of the time when there's something going bad in this government, it's due to the fact that a Democrat's involved in it. And I'm sorry, that's just the truth. I mean, just look at it. How many Republicans do you have pulled up that are involved in this whole JFK assassination? How many, with the Hillary Clinton, how many of the people in that FISA warrant thing were Republicans? How about Benghazi? Just look at it. Look through history and you can see how these people are.
Well, look, wait a minute. Let's go back to Gary Webb.
Okay.
Killed a messenger. There's a guy who did nothing wrong, wrote for the San Jose Mercury News. By the way, the San Jose Mercury News is not the New York Times or the LA Times. That cat goes down to Central America. He does all these things. And again, I just saw the movie brilliantly portrayed by Jeremy Renner, but he shot himself in the head twice to kill himself. I don't know how many suicide people do that, but there's no outrage for Gary Webb, who did the right thing. So, we take a look at being men and people of principle. Society teaches us if you're a person of principle, it ain't going to end well for you.
Exactly, and that's sad because look at the founding fathers. They were willing to give up everything, their lives, or anything they had, their family, watch them being murdered right in front of them. Yeah, let's not, hey, God's principle is profound, and we're supposed to adhere to it. And this is the big issue. You take schools and you take morality and Christianity out of it, and now you're teaching transgendered stuff instead. We've just turned this country into a cesspool in a lot of ways, and it's tragic. And so I got to tell you, anytime I hear anyone that stands up and they lose their job, they should be given sainthood. They really should. And, sometimes you get bombastic because you're just tired of listening to it. You're tired of watching the lies happen right in front of you, and you can't say anything about it. So we all can't be like Reagan-esque every minute of the day and be able to sit down and ponder on it, how we're going to say it. Sometimes it just comes out, and I think it's tragic. Democrats can say anything. Look at Christian Welker.
Well, no, I'm with you on that, but on the other hand, you really can't. I mean, what the heck was that guy thinking?
I agree. Again, when you push people into a corner over and over and over again, at some point they're going to come out. It's just like caging a wild animal. You're supposed to give them a way to escape. But I got to tell you, this is what's happening in the U.S. And, hey, this is what ultimately leads to wars. Enough people get mad and they say, that's it.
You're right, AJ. I got to run, but thank you.
Okay.
All right. I appreciate you. Paulie, we're going to get to you in 2 seconds. Kevin Mill in the morning on your home for Hannity right after Clay and Buck on Idaho's talk station, KIDO Talk Radio. Paulie, nothing personal. We just couldn't hear you after a while.
Yeah, there's a problem with me putting the phone that I have in a sheath so I can be hands-free.
No worries.
When I'm busy doing something. No, I wanted to kind of wrap up. You mentioned earlier that you like books.
I do.
You like to collect them?
I wish I could read them, but yes.
Story time with Kevin Miller.
Exactly.
Yeah. My parents and I and my sisters and siblings, we had a used bookstore for 30 years. And so I know quite a bit about books, more than you would probably ever want to learn. Knew a lot about books that were published in the 1700s, 1800s, all the way up to present day. And it was fun. It was informative, and it taught me a lot about people. Oddly enough, you meet a lot of different. You just meet a lot of just famous people, and you meet a lot of just nobodies. People that just want to collect their science fiction books or whatever happens to be their collectibles. And there was one day that I went into the vault that it was a used post office is what it was, so the vault was still there. It wasn't enclosable as far as locking somebody in or getting locked in there accidentally, but it was a vault nevertheless. I walked in there and I grabbed this book off the shelf, and it was published in 1858, and there was no title on it that you could read on the spine. So I opened it up, and there was a bookworm, a real live bookworm eating the book, eating the ink out of the book. And it just surprised me because I always thought that was kind of a fantasy, that there's no such thing as a bookworm. Just people are called bookworms. And then here I am, got this bookworm in my hand. I was surprised, to say the least. But I met Arnold Palmer, a number of golf people, because where I lived at the time, they had the Bing Crosby National Pro-Am long before it was called the AT&T.
Yeah, long ago and far away. But you saw that bookworm. Did it bite you?
No. It was just doing its thing. It was eating.
Eating a book, literally.
Yeah, it was eating the book. Buy your books and buy your kids, send them to school. What do they do? Eat the covers.
Buy a truck, get a gun.
No, I don't need either right now. I could have used one when I moved last month. But anyway, yeah, I could talk to you for hours about books, but Kamala is. I noticed something today when I was watching her before I left the house, and that was she is a great liar, but she telegraphs it, just like KGP when she's standing up at the podium talking about Biden or whomever she's talking about. She flashes her eyes, she bats her eyes. That's when she's thinking of something to say that she needs to cover her tracks. And Kamala kind of does the same thing. And so there's going to be ways that you can watch her tip herself off. And I think the reason why she wants the vice president there during this interview is so that he'll catch her doing that and stop her from doing it. Because she has a certain kind of movement that she does with her head. She kind of flips her head back when she's just about to do it. And I was surprising that the more times that I watched her and I looked for that, it came up over and over and over and over. So we telegraph our deceit in our lives, even though we think we're getting away with it. And like you were talking about Zuckerberg, he's a larger form of tyranny because he changed the elections and he kept Trump from being in office. And that's so important to be able to have a fair election. And I don't think we've had one in the last three or four elections. So,
well, Paulie, we got to run, but thank you for the call.
Yeah, you have a blessed day.
You too. All right, our friend Paulie and the Bookworm. You never know what you're going to find out here with Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio. We're going to take a look at, the vice president meeting the press. And how do you prepare for the interview of your lifetime with Kevin Miller?
Good morning, Kevin. KIDO Talk Radio traffic from the Idaho Pizza Company studio. Looks good. Eastbound freeway traffic. No major issues. We've got a stall or a traffic stop eastbound just after Robinson on the right shoulder, but it's not causing any issues. They did clear that earlier crash at Linder and Deer Flat. With the new multiplier games from the Idaho Lottery, every scratch is a chance to multiply your win from 2 times up to 20 times. More wins, more woos. I'm Robin Scott. Traffic now on KIDO Talk Radio.
I'm Liz Clayman, and this is the Fox Business Report.
7-Eleven's parent company 7 & I is rejecting a takeover offer from Canada's Couche-Tard, which owns Circle K. Japan-based 7 & I Holdings says the offer is too low and did not sufficiently address regulatory issues, including a possible antitrust investigation in the U.S. Artificial intelligence chipmaker Broadcom shares are slumping down 8%, though its earnings were upbeat. Part of its outlook for the current quarter was disappointing. This morning, the August employment report is released. It's expected to continue the trend of cooler job growth, which would confirm the Fed's plan to lower interest rates in less than 2 weeks. The forecast is for about 160,000 new jobs, with the unemployment rate nudging down to 4.2%. That's your Fox Business Report. I'm Jim Cosola. Invested in you.
In theaters now, Reagan returns to office.
We are the greatest country in the world. We have just forgotten.
You can run from a bully for so long, but after a while, you're going to have to stand up to him. I am about to start the biggest war of this century.
You told me you wanted to make a difference in this world.
What would you have me do?
I want you to fight!
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall!
Reagan, in theaters now. Rated PG-13, may not be suitable for children.
Kevin Miller reminding you, do not give up the fight, because on KIDO Talk Radio and in America, there are more God-fearing, American-loving conservatives than there are liberals. You talk, we listen. Kevin Miller, join me.
KIDO Talk Radio, 107.5 FM and 580
Working with the Claremont Institute or, standing up for what's right. He joins us on KIDO Talk Radio. Mr. Wold, thank you for joining us.
Thanks again for having me on, Kevin. It's good to be with you.
You have worked closely with President Trump, and you're seeing what's going on with the debate and all these back and forths. As someone who has been in the room, what do you think's going on inside his campaign right now, sir?
Yeah, I think the one thing the left continues to underrate about President Trump is his creativity. People really want to position him as, sort of a very conventional figure, a conventional business figure, a conventional politician. But President Trump is an incredibly creative and original mind. He's always looking for new ways to discuss, the hot button issues and put them in terms that people not only will understand, but will resonate with them. He's always looking for new ways to find openings and vulnerabilities against his opponents. And he's also, he's looking for new ways to really make sense of his own vulnerabilities, his own weaknesses. And some people, who love the president will say, well, President Trump doesn't have any weaknesses. But look, every politician, every leader does. And right in the news break there, the discussion was about the rules for the next debate, right? And they said, well, the Trump campaign had essentially insisted on muting the mics when the other candidate is speaking. at some level, that's so that there can be no gotcha moments that the media can then weaponize. Harris has a planned rebuttal that she just interjects and cuts the president off and tries to make her moment for some soundbite for CNN or MSNBC. The other part of that, though, is President Trump acknowledging that, hey, he has a tendency to talk when he shouldn't, to cut off another candidate, and having the mics muted sort of helps him control that impulse. That's the mark of a good leader. And I think that's one of the things that the left continues to underrate about President Trump is he's always thinking anew, and he's always finding a way to improve as a leader and a statesman.
Well, now, let's say, and again, you talk to these folks, they're all your friends, so I agree with you with the gotcha moment, but a lot of people seem to underestimate the vice president, but could we see a return of the prosecutor that really called Joe Biden out for being a segregationist? Is that what, do you think that's the type of individual, that type of offense that they'll use against President Trump?
Yeah, I think so, because, remember, I think you're exactly right, Kevin, because I think she's got two audiences in this debate, right? She has the obligation of speaking to independent voters or voters whose mind haven't been made up yet. And, look, you can go look at the polling on this, and everyone has a different view of how much of the electorate is still undecided. Some say as little as 7%. Some say it's as high as 14, 15%. But she's speaking to that audience to try to persuade them, especially in those 7 to 8 counties that will determine, and notice I didn't say states, I said counties, that will determine the outcome of this election. So that's one audience. The other audience is essentially, the intellectual elite in the country who are going to be sizing her up, whether that's members of the intelligence apparatus, the Foreign Service, some of the multilateral organizations throughout the world, NATO, the UN, to see, is this woman actually capable of going toe-to-toe with a Vladimir Putin? Can she negotiate with van der Leyen and the European Union? Like, how tough is this woman? And so she's got two audiences, and I think you're exactly right. To get those two audiences, there is essentially a silver bullet, which is she's going to go hard. She's going to be something of an attack prosecutor. And I wouldn't be surprised if she brings up some pretty salacious or unsavory criticisms of President Trump to establish those bona fides as someone who can attack and attack from a position of strength.
Theo Wohl joining us, Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio, and that's where really the strategy comes in, where she could say something inappropriate. The president, it seems as if they're trying to bait the president, which is odd considering she really is the pseudo-incumbent.
Yeah, isn't that funny, Kevin? That really is one of the unspoken parts of this election. And, you hit the nail right on the head there, which is she is the incumbent. Again, in the news break there, they mentioned her reversals on the electric vehicle mandate and the wall. We've heard about the left's opposition to the southern border wall now for close to 10 years, and that this was going to be catastrophic to the relationship with Mexico. False. It was going to be catastrophic, for human rights law, that people would starve or they would be without water in the desert. False. That it wouldn't work. False. That it was opposed by ICE and CBP and the other sub agencies at DHS. False. And now here we are after being told that walls don't work. The wall was a waste of money. Walls make for bad neighbors, et cetera, et cetera. Kamala Harris is coming out and endorsing it. I think the flip-flops and the inconsistencies are part of, at some level, as counterintuitive as this may sound, it's a part of a strategy essentially to run as an amorphous candidate. It's very similar to 2008, where Barack Obama was whatever you wanted him to be. He was a blank canvas. All we really knew was hope and change. Changing what? Who knows? Hope for what kind of future? Who knows? But voters could look at Barack and say, oh, he's very aspirational. He's a very dignified and sort of statesman-like presence. And so I can see whatever I want in him. The folks who are running Harris's campaign, which, ironically, they're the same people who ran Obama's campaign, are hoping to achieve the same thing and create that distance from the Biden administration record. And that's going to be, conversely, that's President Trump's mission in these debates, which is to make it plain to the American people, essentially to do the work of a journalist, to say, hey, they're not telling you this, but she's actually been the one in charge of the hyperinflation on grocery prices. She's been the one in charge who has allowed 10.5 to 15.5 million people to come into the country illegally. That's her record. Now let's compare it to the record that I established in 4 years as president. That's going to be his task, and he's not going to get any help. There's not going to be any help from the moderators or journalists in correcting the record and making that plain. So he's got to do it alone.
Well, and they might jump in. One more question about your White House days. How frustrating was it when you had the riots, when literally, we're not making this up because you've told us this, Mr. Wold, you had to fear for your life when you leave the White House compound in Washington, D.C. How frustrating was it to be inside that bubble and not be able to get the truth out?
Enormously, Kevin. Enormously. It's just one of those moments where really it comes home to you. As you and I have talked about before, people want to dismiss this idea of the deep state as some kind of, fever dream or, right-wing conspiracy. But it comes home to you in that moment when you're on the ground, you're watching the Secret Service agents come back from essentially the front line, severely wounded or injured from, having bricks thrown at their faces or being hit by 2x4s. And then you see the press and it's saying, oh, poor little Donald Trump is hiding out in the White House bunker because he's afraid of a few protesters and, peaceful demonstrators who have come to advocate for peace and love in Minneapolis and other places in the country. And you realize then that, wow, the media apparatus, their friends in the Democrat Party and the billionaire class really do control the flow of information such that they can concoct, if they want, they can concoct their own reality. And people at home will see what they want them to see, period. And I think, look, this is where the flip side of that is COVID, the COVID regulations, the COVID lockdowns really encouraged a lot of Americans to go and seek out information, to seek the truth on their own. And the hold that the media apparatus now has on the American mind, on the American consciousness, is less and less. These are not the days of Walter Cronkite. Everyone doesn't get their news from the same source. They have a million different options to kind of ferret out the information and determine what's really going on for themselves. And I think that's going to be the test of this election. Has that really, has that taken hold? Is it a good enough source of information for folks? Or is the media apparatus, the East Coast elite, their little bubble, is it still in control?
Well, and speaking of that, as someone who has been in the arena, the legal arena, the political arena, what do you make of Jack Smith's latest? And again, I don't want to lead the witness, so please go ahead, Mr. Wold.
Yeah, fair, Kevin. Look, I think it's more of the same. I think this is another aspect that Americans are increasingly waking up to, which is our two-tier justice system, that you can have essentially a slap on the wrist for someone who lights fire to someone's small business and burns down a police precinct or engages in, unmitigated violence against fellow citizens, and they're released on their own reconnaissance, the next day, maybe with a small fine. You have someone who was at the January 6th demonstrations at the nation's capital, and they're looking at 25 to life for similar offenses. So, look, increasingly Americans look at this and they say, wow, this is exactly what my high school or 8th grade civics class told me the founders were trying to get away from, which is an arbitrary enforcement of the law. That, depending on who you know or what demographic you are or what party you belong to, you will be treated differently in a court of law. And I think the lawfare from Jack Smith, from Attorney General Letitia James in New York, from the District Attorney Fannie Wills in Fulton County, Georgia, it's all emblematic of the same sort of pathology, which is weaponizing the law against individuals who are on the wrong side of an individual issue or who are a political threat. And Jack Smith, essentially, with the limitless resources of the Department of Justice, with any amount of time, really, and any number of attorneys to throw at the question, rewrote his original prosecution of President Trump in light of the Supreme Court's immunity decision. Most legal observers and commentators, assumed, and I think fairly and rightly, that when the Supreme Court handed down its immunity decision, essentially saying that official acts taken by a president are covered and free of legal liability, that Jack Smith would wind down this operation and essentially say, okay, we don't really have much here. And instead what we've seen is Jack Smith is saying the opposite. We're going to go full bore essentially damn the torpedoes, damn the Supreme Court and their decision. We're going to go right at President Trump, and we're going to make this a real issue. And at some level, Kevin, we really have arrived at a Peronist, state, Perón, Juan Perón and Eva Perón in Argentina, who were always just interested in power, right? Not principle, not a certain political ideology. They could be communists one day, they could be fascists the next day, they could be socialists, the day after that. And that's sort of the modern Democrat left. What they're interested in is power. And at some level, this election is about whether or not the American people want to see the leaders of political parties or their public officials thrown into jail for crimes that courts consistently say don't carry liability. Jack Smith's answer to that is yes, we're going to punish our political enemies and we're going to put them in jail if given the opportunity. I don't know if that's the kind of country that Americans want to live in, if they want to live in essentially a junta-led Argentina. That's what's really is on the ballot this November.
Indeed. And, we've got a lot to talk about. By the way, how long do we have you today, Mr. Wold?
I'm here for as long as you want to talk to me, Kevin.
Well, we appreciate that. We'll take you in 2 segments, but another insight, because the president has a lot of fans and supporters, but why does he continue to do this? Obviously, he can't trust the government, but maybe he could have cut a deal where he could go back to being, a television star. Why does he continue to fight for people that he doesn't even know?
Yeah, the way you frame that, Kevin, I think it really gets at the most it's the most descriptive sort of version of the reality that we are confronting as a nation, which is that we're willing to offer a deal to Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, and we're willing to say to Maduro, look, you've caused all kinds of problems. We know that you're cooperating directly with the Chinese to create mischief in our backyard. You have thrown political prisoners in jail. You have executed political prisoners in essentially rendition facilities in Venezuela. You have wrecked one of the world's great societies and one of the world's great economies. But we're willing to let you go, and you can go live in Dubai or somewhere nice, and we won't prosecute you. Conversely, we will say President Trump will be hounded to the very end of his life. He will be bankrupted. He will be thrown in jail for the mishandling of a few pieces of paper. Even if that proves to be incorrect, they'll still pursue the charges, and there will be no safe space. There'll be no safe harbor. There'll be no concessions made. We want to ensure that this man is publicly humiliated, legally punished, and economically ruined. And I think that really gets at the heart of essentially the doggedness of the modern left, but also to answer your question, why does he do it? This is a man, regardless of the caricature that the left has drawn, and even for people who may still vote for him but are skeptical of this central truth, this is a man who genuinely loves this country, period. Talking basketball about Jerry West and, the Showtime Lakers of the 70s and 80s with Trump, talking about military veterans who served in Korea or some of the nation's greatest generals, Patton, MacArthur, LeMay. This is a man who loves American history, who loves our culture, who loves our food. Look, one of the things I always loved was when the elites would mock him for the way he eats his steak or the way, he prefers serving hamburgers in the White House. How uncouth, how lowbrow, how uncivilized. Look, that's how growing up a working class family, that's how my grandpa ate his steak. That's how, every, big family gathering we had, it was hamburgers and hot dogs. That's a man who actually is proud. He's not serving French food because he has to pretend that America is more civilized or, more European than it is. He's proud to be an American. And so at some level, he keeps doing this because he loves this country, and he knows that the alternative will essentially spell the end of this country. It will wreck this nation. The other part of it is, of course, that they give him no option. The alternative for him, in not running isn't that he is allowed to retire and to influence, Republican politics or comment on the news of the day. The alternative that the Democrats present Trump and his family with is you will be jailed, you will be imprisoned, you will be economically ruined, and you will be publicly excoriated and humiliated, and your legacy will be destroyed. So at some level, Trump is a strong man, and you pick a fight with him, he's not going to back down. He's certainly not going to back down from a bully.
More coming up with our great friend Theo Wold next. Kevin Miller, Stand Informed, KIDO Talk Radio. Mr. Wold, if people want to get a hold of you or your work, and they want to do so, whether it's on X or through an organization, how can they get a hold of you and read what you're up to?
Yeah, they can find me on X at Real Theo Wold, just an homage to the big man, to the boss himself. And then at the Claremont Institute's Center for the American Way of Life, the Claremont Institute is doing, I would argue groundbreaking research and scholarship on, the effects of diversity, equity, and inclusion policies on the U.S. military, on DEI and the change of curricula in public universities, and then on something that I write about extensively on the administrative and deep state, so on the intelligence apparatus and the growth of government bureaucracy and how that affects, in particular, red states, where people may have chosen a different option, but the way that the federal government essentially controls the budget, that controls the block grants, and regulates whole industries, their lives are sort of, twisted and changed by the administrative state located in D.C. So those are all topics there. Check out the Center for the American Way of Life online and see some of their programming is available on YouTube.
Do you ever worry that your work could cause you to be targeted by the deep state, sir?
It's a great question, Kevin. Yeah, certainly. I mean, again, I lecture about this a lot, usually behind closed doors, so I can speak more candidly about my own experiences and some things that, I've learned in my work. If you remember in the White House, so I had a TES SEI, which is the highest clearance level available, and was sort of privy to how the national security apparatus operates, how it works. As a lawyer and at the Department of Justice, familiar with the way that we conduct surveillance, how we investigate American citizens. And I will tell you, there are a lot of really powerful tools and authorities at the disposal of the U.S. federal government. And really, this manifests in two ways. Either people are reluctant and reticent to talk about those tools because they are concerned about the potential damage it could do to their own life, their livelihood, their families, or, essentially they try and they are blackmailed or extorted because of personal vices or personal corruption, and then they are silenced from that. Here's the beautiful part about my life is I didn't set out to do any of this. I grew up in a pretty poor working class family. I was very lucky to have a good education and to get some opportunities in my early career. But my experience working in the White House, which, I always say the person who had my job under Obama, she left when Obama's term ended, and she took a seven-figure job with AT&T Global South Asia. None of that was on offer to me. None of that. What I was told was good luck getting hired as a janitor after working in the White House at some of the highest levels of our government for 3 years. After January 6th, there were no opportunities. So the answer to the question came not because I chose it, really, but because circumstances demanded it, which is you are blackballed. You're essentially listed as a non, as an untouchable. You want to clean toilets for the rest of your life. You can do that. You can work at Walmart. Maybe you can do these things and we won't bother you. But if you stick your head above the surface, we will crush you. And I think for me it was, well, I'm already in for a penny, in for a pound. You want to tell me that my entire career is wiped away and my service is meaningless, then I'm going to go and speak the truth. I have nothing more to lose. And so, in writing about the deep state, talking about the administrative state, I think my mission is just to tell my fellow citizens, look, a lot of the things that are being done in your name and with legal tools, a lot of these things are not unlawful. They're not doing things that are beyond the law. They've actually written the laws to allow them to do some of these things. You should know that that's being done in your name because you as a citizen are the actual sovereign in our government. And, it's something very consistent with what Frank Church said, decades ago, which is we need to have some accountability. We need to have some transparency in this government. And the American citizen should really know what the federal government, especially the intelligence agencies, are up to, because they all say they're doing it on your behalf. And really, they're doing it to keep you in a position of obedience and to make sure that at the end of the day, to use a phrase of a mentor of mine, look, they want to make sure that you shut up and you obey. And if you ask questions, especially the wrong ones, they're going to punish you. And so that's my mission, is to make that known And really at this point, I worry about my kids and I worry about the country that they'll inherit and I worry about their safety. But as far as I'm concerned, for me, look, I didn't choose this life, but now given this opportunity as an untouchable, I'm going to continue to speak the truth. And there's nothing anyone can do to me to silence me.
Well, if we could get you for one more segment, I would like to follow up, though, because I'm always fascinated. I think we all are inspired by people like yourself and others who have come from a humble spot, and then you find yourself in the White House, whether it's Congressman Fulcher or your old boss, Attorney General Raul Labrador. We always ask them what it was like when you realized here you are. Your daily commute is you see the beautiful rotunda before the sun comes up and probably don't leave until the sun goes down. As a kid who, aspired to great things like we all do and worked hard and made it happen, what was that? What was the perspective like? Did you think of your family members, teachers, others who got you there?
Yeah, I mean, Kevin, that's such a beautiful question because especially that last clause, that's exactly right. And that's what I always try to share, with parents who are thinking through that really difficult question of how do we even pay for college? Everyone tells us our kid has to go to college. How are we going to pay for this to give them this opportunity? Or young people who are saying, look, like, I'm really interested in ideas and, I really want to be involved. How do I do this? And for me, being in the White House, I thought a lot about my dad pretty much every day. And there were times when people would criticize me and say, hey, man, this is just an interagency policy process. We're just talking about fentanyl. And I'd say, look, like, not to sound like a leftist, but this is personal. These were things that my family has struggled with drug addiction, with criminality, with poverty. And these are things that were a part of my father, a working class carpenter in his life. And so I'm not just here because I have a title. I'm not just here because this is a really cool place to work. I'm here every day thinking about these people who shaped and formed me. So my grandfather, who was a Pearl Harbor survivor, and really sort of instilled in me that notion that, yeah, look, like, you may be poor, but if you work hard and you read books, you can really get somewhere. And a whole host of teachers who were always willing to invest in me, even when I was, a difficult student or, too loud and too obnoxious in class. So that's exactly right, Kevin. I mean, at the end of the day, the experience is really cool. It is awe-inspiring to be in the Oval Office, to be in those rooms where, Lincoln wrote the Emancipation Proclamation, where Madison and Jefferson dined. Those are super cool. But the best part was thinking, wow, I'm here in this role on behalf of all of these men and women who helped shape me and who have contributed to this country. So I really got to do a good job because it's not just about serving the president and the American people. It's about representing my family name and the people who have invested in me.
Yes, Mr. Wold, I think that's so important because, again, we kind of gloss over those things, but to be there and to be in those rooms and the old floors in the White House, and you think back to all those people that loved you and others unconditionally.
Yeah, I mean, amen. Yeah. And really, at the end of the day, that politics in the American system of government, in a representative republic, is very, as a mentor of mine used to say, it's very humane because it's about human things. And so, if you're just thinking about statistics on a balance sheet, like, people always look at the jobs report, right? And they're always saying, oh, is the economy going up? Is it going down? Do we add new jobs? Do we lose new jobs? And to really break that down and say, these are people's livelihoods. These are people's ability to buy a new truck, to take a weekend vacation to Payette or, to go over to the coast in Oregon. These are people's abilities to pay for their kids going to college. They're not just statistics on a balance sheet. These are real people with real dreams, real aspirations, real responsibilities to children, to disabled relatives, to elderly parents. And so really always trying to keep that in mind, especially for someone like me who loves policy, loves ideas, loves getting into the meat of the law. At the end of the day, our system of government isn't about moving widgets or moving statistics around on spreadsheets. It's about people. And I think, to just bring it back to President Trump, I think that's one of his unique gifts, right? You see him in these long-form interviews, and I know this got a lot of attention on social media, but that interview with Theo Vaughn, which is available on YouTube, people should check it out. And at that point when Theo Vaughn describes his, long-standing addiction to cocaine, it's a very humane interaction from President Trump, where he is both curious, like, how did you get into that? And secondly, when Theo Von essentially concedes, yeah, it made me feel bad. I didn't like who I was, and I didn't like the way it made me feel. And the sort of compassion that you get from Trump on his face, in his words, in the empathy that his tone conveys, that's a man who understands that our government at the end of the day is about people. It's about people, not statistics.
All right, Mr. Wolde, you're okay with staying one more segment?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah, we're going to get to actually what we're going to talk about next, so we appreciate you, sir. Please hang on. All right, our friend Theo Wolde joining us. Kevin Mill in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio. I'm on to talking a little bit more about politics and immigration. Before we get to, again, your latest X post that is talking a lot about Idaho and who has been arrested, as someone who is a conservative, as someone who is a Republican, your reaction, as someone who has worked in the White House with President Trump directly, your reaction to the comments, the endorsements of our fellow Republicans that worked in the White Houses like you did, of Bush, they worked for McCain and Senator Romney as well. These Republicans, the two Bush White House alumni, along with former staffers of Senator McCain and Senator Romney, saying that they're going to endorse the vice president. Why does this happen?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think why it happens is people are always really interested in being relevant. So, this is a way of showing they still have the ability to shift votes and to be at the center of national discussion. I don't want to delegitimize anyone's honest, policy or temperamental differences with President Trump. I think I think you and I both could say, President Trump isn't everyone's cup of tea. But look, here's the thing I find really amusing about it. You scroll through that list, Kevin, because people will take these headlines on faith, and it'll just say, 250 staffers or 50 intelligence officers signed this open letter. Go and open the actual document and look through the names. You've got 8 interns. That's their title. Intern to John McCain, intern to Mitt Romney. You've got 8 interns. You have a number of folks who are identified as their title is volunteer. So to get to that number, they essentially had to go and ask people who were 17, 18 years old, serving, in Senator John McCain's Senate office as a summer intern or a campaign volunteer who door knocked in Phoenix. And I'm not trying to belittle those contributions. They're essential to how our democracy functions, and it's an important part of our government. It's a great experience for young people and for people who have real jobs outside of politics to participate. But that's not what the headlines make you believe. The headlines make you believe that these are senior level officials who worked for those presidential candidates or in their Senate and governor's offices, and that they are coming out saying this man is dangerous or a threat. No, at the end of the day, it's just a list of names. And here's the real takeaway that I have on it, is this is how we know the realignment, the political realignment of the nation is almost complete. The neoconservatives, those who are, the first to send our troops into harm's way, ask questions later, figure it out, mission accomplished types, the folks who really have never seen a foreign adventurism project and said, wow, maybe this isn't for the United States to involve itself in. Those people are now almost firmly in the Democrat camp. The pro-war party then is the Democrat Party. The pro-peace party is now the Republican Party. And you could go down the list. The pro-working class party is the Republican Party. The pro-free speech party is the Republican Party. The pro restraint on American spending abroad is the Republican Party. So the realignments that we've been talking about for years, if you really want to credit this letter for anything, it's the strongest indication that we have essentially, in many ways flip-flopped on some of the crucial issues, and that the Democrats are now the party beholden to multilateral organizations and the war machine. And I'm okay with that. I am just perfectly happy that the Republican Party now is willing to say, no, we're not going to send our young men and women to die on foreign soil just because some, theorist, some think tank says that there are weapons of mass destruction, or that somehow this small country that no one has ever heard of in America has some, Rube Goldberg machine connection to American national security. No, let the Democrats have that, and the Republicans will run on peace and prosperity, and we will show the American people, especially our children, a better future.
Well, usually we've had our friends from the Federation for American Immigration Reform or the Center for Immigration Studies on to give us the report on illegal immigration in the state of Idaho. But, Mr. Wold, you've become our expert and perhaps the state's expert on what's really happening concerning illegal immigration in the state of Idaho. You've been posting on X about this. Can you tell us what you've discovered lately?
Yeah, so last time we talked, Kevin, we talked about this report that is published on a monthly basis. That's what the law and federal regulations require. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and just to sort of get people's orientation framed correctly. So CBP does all the work at the border. And they have like a 200-mile radius that they'll do in the border zone. ICE handles all the enforcement of our federal immigration laws in the interior of the United States. So there was a report published, and for the first time, 3 Idaho counties were listed as essentially being non-compliant or non-cooperative with ICE's official authorities, its enforcement authorities. And there's a back and forth with one of those counties, Kootenai County up north, the Sheriff Norris, Bob Norris, who's been in office there, I think, for about 3.5 years and running for re-election this year. Sheriff Norris sort of vehemently denied that, argued against Kootenai County should not be included in this report. There has to be some kind of error. And it turns out that ICE did, in fact, make a mistake. They issued a statement. This was sort of my position for the last 2 weeks, was to say, look, this can be easily clarified. Get a statement from the Seattle field office, which has sort of jurisdictional authority over North Idaho. Get them to clarify whether they made a mistake in including you. And I think this immediately goes away as a story. In those conversations, Sheriff Norris agreed to sign on to a 287G agreement. This is really important for your listeners to think about, because when you think about deportations coming in the spring of next year and people, say, well, how will Trump do this? It will start and end with local and state law enforcement. And the 287G agreement allows ICE and some of the federal immigration authorities to deputize local law enforcement and to use their resources and their manpower to collect criminal illegal aliens and get them out of the country. Only 2 counties in Idaho currently have signed on to 287G agreements, Power County and Gooding County. This is obviously something to shoot for. Now, it should be said, lots of rural counties, they're cash-strapped. They already have personnel and budget issues. They don't have a lot of resources to deal with crime generally. And a 287G agreement may be a burden. It may be too great of a burden for them to take on. But it's certainly something to aspire to, and really gets the meat when Idaho says it is a sanctuary-free state. We do not allow sanctuary jurisdictions to protect illegal aliens from federal immigration law or state law. This is where the rubber hits the road. Like, sign on to a 287G agreement and you've hit the gold standard. So that's one story. The other story, it's probably inappropriate to demarcate it as an immigration story right now. We don't know all the facts, but there was an incident of violence in Boise, the robbing of a convenience store at a stinker station in Hyde Park, where 2 men entered the store and tried to walk away with a number of alcohol bottles without paying. They were confronted by some, good Samaritan citizens who said, hey, you can't do that. You're stealing. At which point a gentleman got out of a waiting vehicle and pulled a firearm on those 2 citizens. They sped away, and then later they were apprehended 2 of the gentlemen were apprehended at an incident on 24th and Fairview, which, if anyone knows Boise, that's sort of a hotbed of illicit drug use and, sort of just general low-grade criminality. They were arrested there after stabbing an individual, cutting him on the throat. Now, 2 of these men have been arrested, Abdullahi Qasim and Mebua Nasik. The 3rd gentleman is at large. And I think the interesting part of the story is where it occurred. That's the part people should focus on. That neighborhood in Boise and Hyde Park is generally considered pretty safe. I know if you're living out in Marsing or, in Star, you're like, Boise's not safe. Come on, Theo. But generally, for a fairly large city, Boise is pretty safe, and these metrics of criminality have been ticking up and up and up. And here's the question people should be asking. What's occurring at the same time? What's occurring at the same time is the city is transforming. It is being changed in part by legal immigration, also by illegal immigration. And so I think when we're thinking through what does the future of Idaho look like, that distinguishing feature that Idaho has that Washington State or Oregon do not have is safe streets and safe communities. That's just not true in a lot of places in Northern California, in Oregon, in Washington. But Idaho, people are generally free from violent crime, from burglary, from theft. And those are one of those questions that we have to ask about what will the state look like in the next 10 to 15 to 20 years as we deal with an integration challenge of admitting. I mean, remember, Kevin, like people often want to say legal immigration good, illegal bad. And it's a more difficult question to answer when you're looking at admitting about 1.5 million legal immigrants every single year. And you know, of those 1.5, don't forget 60,000 of legal immigrants who come into the country every year. That's not a one-off. Every year, 60,000 of those are selected through what's called the diversity visa lottery, which is just a random selection. You have no prior connections to the United States, no family here. You may not even speak our language. But we basically take your name out of like an NBA draft pick lottery, and you get to come here. That presents real unique integration challenges. And, you know, look, we have a housing crisis in Idaho generally. We have some employment issues generally. If you arrive in this country off of a flight, say, from Sierra Leone or, you know, from Latvia, and you get here, you don't speak the language, you've never lived in America, you don't even know American sports or television, you have no job. There is the real potential for social isolation, for resentment, and sometimes for finding your way, which can lead into networks of criminality. So these are the things that people need to think about. And as we see this story unfold, one other solution that Idaho policymakers really need to think through is, you know, we don't know the background. These three gentlemen may be Idaho citizens born in Idaho. They may be legal immigrants, or they may have come here through a refugee or asylum program, or they may be illegal aliens. We don't know yet. But when we have the facts, one thing I think most Idahoans will want is we need to know the rates of criminality in the immigrant population in Idaho. That just informs the policy discussion. It could turn out, as many leftists maintain, that immigrants do not commit crimes at a higher or greater rate than you know, citizens of the country. But it could turn out that illegal aliens, because of the various networks that they travel in, because of the effects of the cartels, you name it, are in fact committing crimes at a higher rate. And any crime committed by an illegal alien is a preventable crime. And so it's important to inform that policy discussion, that we're not just talking about anecdotes or I feel this way or I don't like that guy because he doesn't speak my language and his skin color is different, that we actually root it in some real numbers. And I think one thing that could go a long way, especially in Idaho, is if we start collecting this sort of statistical overlay and saying, look, like when we book someone into a county or state penitentiary or corrections facility, we're going to ask the citizenship question. Do you have status? Do you have citizenship? Are you unlawful? And that will start to inform the analysis for the legislature, for mayors, for the governor to say, no, it isn't a real issue for immigrant crime, or no, actually it turns out here in Idaho it is. And I think those are the kinds of questions that this kind of story prompts in my mind. Where this crime took place, a generally safe neighborhood, saw a guy pull an illegal firearm on two Good Samaritan citizens. That should be a cause of concern for all Idahoans. Even if you don't frequent Boise, you don't even like Boise, you should generally ask the question, why is this now happening in a generally safe neighborhood and a safe community in my state? And let's get to the bottom of it.
Mr. Wold, one more time, if people want to get a hold of you, we appreciate your time, and we thank you for the information. We'd love to have you back, as always, but we'd love to make sure that people can get a hold of you.
You can check me out on X at Real Theo Wold, and then also look at the Center for the American Way of Life at the Claremont Institute in D.C. And, you know, look, if people have questions, I'm always open to, you know, a policy discussion. Even with people who disagree with me, you can find me on X and shoot me a DM, and we can go from there. So thanks again for having me on, Kevin. It's always a great conversation with you.
Thank you, sir. Have a great day.
You too.
Our great friend Theo Wold will get your reaction next. Let's get to Doug in Mountain Home. Doug, thank you for your patience. I know you've called back a few times. Doug.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, go ahead, please. I can hear you.
Yeah, hey. I was just wondering if I was listening to Beck about a week or so ago, and he had a cut, Kevin, of when she was maybe right after she was the Attorney General or whatever she was there in Frisco. And, I mean, if you guys, somebody ought to be playing that thing over and over and over and over from what she was saying, Kevin. I mean, it was like, that's why Beck put it on her. She said, like, well, I learned at the stroke of my pen, I could put somebody in prison. I learned at the stroke of my pen that I could ruin families, that I could tear families apart. I learned just on and on about the stroke of my pen. Somebody needs to play this crap. Have you ever heard that one?
Doug, I'll look into that.
Please do.
Okay.
And whoever you just had on there, I'm hard of hearing. I mean, that was a good interview. Long, but it was good. So he worked under a whole bunch of the presidents in the White House?
He worked for President Trump only.
Oh, okay. I thought, but he was in there while Bush and Obama and them were there.
Well, no, the Bush and Obama people, they've endorsed Kamala Harris. That was what we were talking about.
Got you. So, anyway, see if you can't find that, Kevin, because, I mean,